Hey everybody and welcome. Today I'm going to be presenting an in-depth but slow tutorial of Feudum, a rather heavy game, lots of rules, lots of stuff to cover, but very interesting. Contains a lot of fascinating elements that I have not seen in other games before. So I think there's a lot to enjoy here. As you can see, I am not using the board game pieces today. I'm using a program that I wrote to play the game. If you've watched any of my videos before, either my tutorials or playthroughs, you know that I love programming games, especially for games, of course, that I enjoy and that I can play solo, because it makes it far easier to play the game solo, a lot less setup and whatnot. I can do it on the road. And certainly when it comes to presenting a tutorial, much easier for me to present it this way than to have a handheld camera zooming around all over the place. So lots to cover. I think I'm just going to get underway, and here we go. So the object of Feudum, no surprise, is to score the most points over 4 epics. In fact, the game consists of 5 epics, but the 5th epic is really just endgame scoring. So for all intents and purposes, you're going to be playing over 4 epics. And that equates to a roughly 7 to 11 rounds of play. The speed of the game is somewhat variable. Players have control over how fast or how slow it plays out. It's always interesting when games include that element, and there's a certain amount of jockeying that goes on in terms of seeing how the game's going to play out. Is your score going to be what you thought it was going to be when the game finally ends, once you see that the end game is near? Lots of interesting gameplay here. So the game board that you see before you here consists of 22 locations divided into 6 different regions. There is the sea region, which consists of these 3 locations. This one here, this one, and this one. You can think of it as sort of the small islands. Then there is the normal islands region, which consists of the big islands, these 2 locations and these 2 locations. Next, we have the forest, which consists of 3 locations right here, followed by the desert, which is 5 locations down here in the bottom. Similarly, the Badlands area also has 5 locations, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And finally, we have the mountains region, which consists of 2 locations. The locations are actually broken into 2 groups. There are the starting locations, which are the 6 locations that are encircled in pink. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 starting locations. 2 in the Badlands, 2 in the forest, and 2 in the desert, basically in the center of the board. Each of the locations is one of 3 types. An outpost, which are represented by these light purplish castles. Farms, which are represented by these green discs. And towns, which are represented by the yellow discs. Now, in fact, there are more outposts in the game, at least at the beginning of the game, than there are farms, and there are more farms in the game than there are towns. The 6 starting locations, however, there's 2 of each type. So if you look at the 6 starting locations, you'll see that we have 2 outposts, 2 farms, and 2 towns. Those 6 location discs are shuffled up and randomly distributed on the starting spaces. So that's a large part of the variability of the game, because you never know what locations are going to be where when the game starts up. Aside from those 6 starting locations, then we have the remaining 16 locations. So there's 22 locations in all, 6 of which are starting locations, and then the other are 16. And of those 16, I believe 3 of them are towns. If I'm not mistaken, I think 5 of them are farms, so that's 8, and then the other 8 are outposts. So the game is heavily leaning toward outposts at the start, and then to a lesser degree there are farms, and then to even a lesser degree there are towns. Big part of the game, of course, is upgrading these locations. So you'll be upgrading outposts into farms, upgrading farms into towns, and then ultimately possibly updating or improving towns into feudums. But we'll talk about that as the game goes on. A large part of the game centers around you as a player trying to secure membership status in one or more of 6 different guilds that encircle the outside of the board. So starting down here in the bottom left corner, we have the Farmers Guild. Then we have the Merchants Guild. Up here in the top left, we have the Alchemists Guild. Then zooming over here to the right side of the board, we have the Knights Guild, followed by the Nobles Guild, and then lastly the Monks Guild. You're going to be trying to establish a foothold in these guilds, first by migrating one or more of your dice, or pawns as they're called in the game. I'll probably be using the term pawn going forward, but in fact they look like big chunky dice that are 6-sided, and each of the 6 sides corresponds to one of the guilds. So if I look at the 6 sides of this die, you can see that the 6 faces correspond to the icons that represent the 6 guilds. So the pig is the Farmers Guild. The coins, or the shillings, represents the Merchants Guild. The gear is the icon for the Alchemist Guild. The looks like a battle axe, I guess, is the icon for the Knights Guild. Queen Anne's crown is represents the Nobles Guild. And finally, the cross represents the Monks Guild. So what you're going to be doing is, certainly a large part of the game revolves around you taking one or more of your pawns, setting it to a particular side so it's associated with that particular guild, moving it onto the board so that you can establish a certain level of status in a guild. If you have more status in a guild than other players, you are the guild master. If you come in second or tie with the guildmaster but come in after the guildmaster set up shop, then you are going to be the journeyman. And the only way you could become the guildmaster is by accumulating more status than the guildmaster has. If you're playing a 4, 5, or 6 player game, and I'm not sure I would play with 5 or 6 players, I think 4 players is plenty. But it certainly all depends upon how well the players know the game going in. But if you are playing the game with 4 or more players, then you can also include the apprentice of each guild. So the guild master obviously is the top spot. That actually equates to 5 victory points at the end of every epic. The journeyman is the second spot. That is worth 3 victory points at the end of every epic. And then finally, the apprentice spot, only if you're playing with 4 or more players, is worth 1 victory point. And that's about all you get by being the apprentice and being in 3rd place. It's not a great position to be in. Usually, you're better off checking out your options in other guilds. So each round of the game consists of 2 main steps, really. There's the action phase, which is the meat of each round, where all players take into their hand their 11 action cards, and they secretly select 4 or 5 of them to play over the course of the round. Once everybody has chosen their 4 or 5 cards and set aside the cards that they are not going to be playing with, the round begins. And then beginning with the start player and then going in turn order, every player plays 1 action at a time. The order in which you play your cards can vary, and certainly may very well vary, because it may all depend on what other players do. So you need to take all that into consideration when you're choosing which cards you're going to be playing. Otherwise, you might get stuck with a card that you're forced to play but can't get any value out of, and you have to forfeit the action because circumstances have changed and you no longer can take that action. Once every player has played all their cards, so you go all the way around, and of course some players may bow out of a round sooner than others, depending upon how many cards they're playing. Once everybody has had the opportunity to play all their cards, then you go through what's called the Nourish Pawns phase, in which, like somewhat like a Uwe Rosenberg game, everybody has to pay or feed their pawns that are on the board. You have two ways to feed your pawns. You either feed them with food, which takes care of just that round, their requirements for that round, or you can feed them with wine from your wine barrel, and that actually provides them with enough nourishment to get them through 2 rounds. But there's a downside. When you feed them with wine, they get a little intoxicated, and the pawns don't quite perform as well, especially in battle, than they normally would. You'll see how all that plays out over the course of this walkthrough. Once you finish the Nourish Pawns phase, then there's some little bookkeeping that happens as far as the region tiles are concerned down here at the bottom of the board. And then you determine whether or not the region tiles indicate that the epic has ended. If the epic is not ended, you just continue on to the next round of play. If the epic has ended, you do endgame. You do some Dawn of Epic scoring, it's called, and you some other bookkeeping depending upon what epic it is, and then you continue with the next round of play until finally you've triggered the final epic, Epic 5. At that point, once again, you do a Dawn of Epic scoring for the epic that just finished, and then you immediately move into endgame scoring, which includes some other aspects of scoring that aren't covered in the Dawn of Epic scoring. The resources consist of 5 basic goods, and then aside from that, there are some other resources as well that I'll talk about. But the 5 basic goods are food, which I've already mentioned. Food is pretty critical because it's used to a large degree to feed your pawns that are on the board at the end of every round. It also comes in handy when you want to get pawns onto the board and for some other miscellaneous reasons. So food is probably one of the more important goods in the game. There's also saltpeter. Saltpeter comes in handy. Remember earlier I said each player can select to play 4 or 5 cards over the course of the round. Obviously, playing 5 actions is better than playing 4 actions. The cost to playing that extra card is to pay a saltpeter. So that's a big part of what the role saltpeter plays in the game. But it also plays other roles as well. It's very useful in battle. It comes in handy when you want to repeat an action, and maybe a couple other possibilities. So that's called an extra action when you're performing 5 actions in a round as opposed to 4. And you're paying that saltpeter up front, showing every player that that's what you plan to do for that round. Then we have sulfur, which is these are all represented by cubes. So the food are little green cubes, or pink, actually, depending upon, there's actually 2 sets of cubes that come with the game, depending on what version you have. You might have pink or you might have green, your choice. Saltpeter are white cubes. The sulfur are little yellow cubes. Sulfur is used to preserve the wine in your wine barrel. So if you want to have wine to nourish your pawns, or you want to do some other things in the game, such as throwing a feast for one of your opponents, you have to have sulfur that's preserving the wine in your wine barrel. When you gain sulfur in the game, you actually have to commit either to keeping it in your personal supply or committing it to your wine barrel. Once you commit it either to your wine barrel or to your personal supply, you don't get to change your mind later on. You have to make that decision every time you receive sulfur. Sulfur in the game allows you to execute what's called a sequential action, as opposed to an extra action where you're taking 5 actions over the course of the round as opposed to 4. A sequential action is when you choose to execute 2 actions back to back, as opposed to taking your normal action, then waiting for every other player to take one of their actions, and then you take another action, and so forth. There may be times in the game where you want to actually get an action done and immediately move into a second action. Maybe you're afraid of what one of your opponents is going to do, or maybe you want to execute an attack and want to try to catch them by surprise, whatever the case may be. So Saltpeter is used for extra actions. Sulfur is used for a sequential or back-to-back action. You have to decide, as I said at the start of that part of that phase of the round, whether you're going to be committing a saltpeter to do an extra action, committing a sulfur to do a sequential action, or neither, if you're just going to take your normal 4 actions. You can't do both an extra action and a sequential action. It's one or the other, or neither. Then we have iron, which are represented by black cubes. Iron is principally used when you are improving a farm into a town, as opposed to wood, which is a resource you would use if you're improving an outpost into a farm. Iron also comes in handy when you're doing an explore action, and wood can come in handy when you're doing a different variation of the improve action. Again, you'll see all these actions play out once I get into the walkthrough, and you'll see how they vary. You'll see what your choices are. You'll see how each good play, and how each guild, for that matter, plays a role in how the action plays out, and whether you get any particular special abilities associated with that action. Aside from these 5 basic goods, there are other resources involved. There are shillings, which is the main currency of the game. As you can see over here, every player starts the game with 7 food and 7 shillings. Aside from shillings, there's also a resource that's called King's Seals. They're actually 2-sided discs. One side has this red King seal on them, as shown here in the Noble Guild, as opposed to the other side, which are rosary beads. That look like these striped resources that vary in value from 2 to 5. So the lowest rosary bead from the monk is going to have a value of 2, while the highest value is going to have a value of 5. Not surprisingly, there are only a few 5s in the supply, maybe 2 or 3 at most, and there are a few more 4s and more 3s, and of course more 2s than anything else. I think in total there are 17 King Seals / rosary beads in the game. Of course, they start out all face down with the red King Seal side up, so you don't really know what their rosary bead value is. When the game starts up, for example, you have these 4 King Seals that are placed here in the Nobles Guild, and then in the Monks Guild there are actually 4 King Seals that are flipped with the rosary bead side face up, so you know what their value is. And there's also 1 rosary bead face up over here on the other side of the board in the bottom left corner here in the Farmers Guild. The other items you have, in summary, are your 3 pawns. You start the game with the 3 pawns, and you end the game with 3 pawns. You'll never have more. So pawns are very critical in, as I said, giving you that foothold into a guild and performing certain kinds of actions. And where your pawns are on the board, and where you move them around, or how you place them, is very key to whether you're going to meet with success or maybe not so much success over the course of the game. Each player has available to them a total of 20 influence markers, but you start the game with only 7 of them. So every player starts with these 7 hexagonal influence markers. Then, as I said, everybody actually has 20 available to them over the course of the game. It's hard to get all 20, but it's possible. Aside from the 7 you start with, there are 2 for every player that appear in the Knights Guild over here. And then aside from those, there are 11 that are in the supply off to the side of the board. And that I have down here a little chart that shows you how much influence is in the supply in case you just want to keep track of that. Then every player also has available to them 4 player discs. Now, one of those discs is just on the score track, starts on the 0 space. So that one doesn't count. Other than that, each player has 3 discs. One that's completely blank on both sides, and 2 that have a blank side and what's called a Reeves side that shows a score of 1 victory point on it, as you can see down here. I think the term Reeve represented the head of the town, the mayor or the magistrate, whatever the case may be. I think that's where the term comes from, as far as from medieval days. Of course, as you can see, that's sort of the setting that is behind the game here. So we've got the pawns, we have the influence markers, we have the player discs / Reeves. Every player, as I said, has this personal supply of goods. They start with 7 food, 7 shillings. Every player has what's called a player pouch. The only reason you have a player pouch is so that you can very clearly indicate to other players whether you're committing a saltpeter to play an extra action or committing a sulfur in order to perform a sequential action. If there's any doubt or there's any question or players want to see what other players are doing, you always do this in turn order. So the rules suggest that once, if, for example, as you can see in this sample walkthrough, the game is opening up with the red player being the starting player. If pink wanted to wait until red committed to her move, the rules state that red should say, "Long live the king," when red has finally committed to either playing an extra action, a sequential action, or neither, just playing her normal 4 actions. Of course, you don't have to yell out, "Long live the king." You could just simply say, "I'm ready" or "I'm done." However your gaming group plays. But as I said, it's always possible that someone who plays later in a round can decide to wait until they see what another player ahead of them is going to do before they decide, because you can tell a lot by what a player might be planning if you see that they've committed a saltpeter to doing an extra action or a sulfur to doing a sequential action, or neither, if they're just going to play 4 normal actions in their regular turns. All these items, these goods and resources that I've talked about, the king seals, the rosary beads, your pawns, and so forth, all of this is pretty much public information. Obviously, the king seals that are in the supply are private because their rosary bead values are all face down. The only time you get to see what those values are when they are flipped up, face up in the, as I said, in the Monks Guild or in the Farmers Guild. But if you actually get one or more of these king seals into your personal supply, and you may want one because king seals are valuable when you want to, say, improve a town into a feudum, where the game gets its name, or king seals also are used in order to lock in end-game scoring cards called royal writs. We'll see how those work later on as well. Both of those elements of the game use king seals. So you may need to get some king seals into your supply, and when you do, you can obviously see what their value is on the other side. That may give you an idea of what's still left in the supply. If you're wondering if one of those value 5 rosary beads is going to make itself known at some point. And then, of course, your royal writs that you collect, your hand of royal writs, is also kept private. You can have no more than 3 royal writs in your hand at any one time. If you get more, then you have to discard down to 3. But I'll talk more about that later when I get into royal writs. So I said at the start of the game, every player starts with 7 food and 7 shillings and their basic items, and they also start with 3 different goods of their choice. So starting with the randomly chosen start player, every player is going to decide how much they want to take. So, or rather, what 3 goods they want to take into their supply. Now, the 3 goods they choose have to be 3 different unique goods. They can't take 2 saltpeter and an iron, for example. They have to be one of 3 different types of goods. So for this purposes of this walkthrough today, I'm going to have red choose to take a saltpeter and an iron. So as you can see, as I'm clicking on these goods over here, the values of the resources for the red player are showing up on the left-hand side. And then I'm going to also have red choose to take a sulfur. Now, anytime you gain sulfur in the game, like I said, You have to decide, is it going to get stored in your wine barrel so you'll have wine available to feed your ponds later on and possibly be used for other purposes, or do you want to have it in your supply so you could possibly perform a sequential action or do something else? I think for now I'm just going to have Red keep it in her wine barrel so that later on I can demonstrate how wine in your wine barrel is used. So I'm going to have Red choose to put that in her wine barrel. So that sulfur gets stored in her color barrel right on the game board as opposed to her personal supply. And as I said, now that's committed to her wine barrel. She can't change her mind later on and decide to take it back into her personal supply. I should point out, by the way, that every player's wine barrel is limited to a total of 3 sulfur. Pink, I'm going to have Pink take a saltpeter. Saltpeter is really useful to have right at the start of the game. I'm going to have Pink skip the sulfur for now. I'll have Pink take an iron and a wood. As I said, taking food early in the game is not quite as heavy a requirement because you do start with 7 food. So you don't start feeling the pinch of having to need more food until the game gets into that second or third round, and then you've got to start thinking of other ways to get some food into your supply. Before the game actually starts, each player also takes one of their pawns and places it in one of the 6 starting locations on the game board. So right off the bat, every player is going to establish a stake in one of the guilds. So to see how this works, I'm going to have Red take one of her pawns and set it to the merchant side. That's the 3 coins. And now I'm going to drag that out and place it in one of the 6 starting locations. I think I'm going to have her place it maybe in this outpost down here in the south. So I am going to drag this pawn out here, set it beside this location. And now, just having that pawn on the board set to the merchant side, Merchant's Guild, Red has now established herself as being the guild master of the Merchant's Guild. And she denotes that by taking one of her 7 influence markers and placing it on the guild master's spot in the guild itself. So if you look at the close-up of every guild has a guild master spot, which is represented by a 5 victory point icon. Then there's a journeyman spot over here, which is represented by a 3 victory point space. And finally, as I said, if you're playing 4 more players, there's an apprentice spot as well in each guild. So now it's Pink's turn to bring out one of his pawns on the board. And now I've already decided that Red's going to be she and Pink's going to be he. I hope I don't mess that up. I'll probably get the gender all screwed up as I go on, but I'll try to keep things straight. Pink is going to bring on an alchemist. So I'm going to switch his pawn here to be an alchemist face-up. And I'm going to drag that out right here to this farm in the forest. And because it's an alchemist, Pink is now the guild master of the Alchemist Guild. We're starting the game off with Red down here with a merchant and being the guild master of the Merchants Guild, and Pink over here at this farm being the guild master of the Alchemists Guild. And now, of course, each player is left with only 2 pawns in their supply and only 6 influence markers. As you'll see, influence markers are used pretty quickly in this game, and you can always get more, but you have to work at it to get more. So managing your influence markers, especially because they are multi-use, multi-purposed. Some of them, or a lot of them I should say, end up on the board, and some of them are used to show that you've got a status in a particular guild. You might have status stars in a guild that makes you eligible to be the guild master, but if you don't have a free influence marker to place on that spot in the guild, then it means nothing. You have to wait until you actually get a free influence marker and hope that in the meantime no other player beat you out in that guild. Alright, so what goes into calculating your status in a guild? Well, it's actually not very complicated at all. First of all, any pawn that is associated with your guild, because that's the side that the pawn is face up, gets 1 status star. So the fact that I've got a pawn on the board that is assigned to the Merchant Guild means I have 1 status star in the Merchant Guild. And because no one else is in the Merchant Guild or has a pawn face up to the merchant, then that means I alone have the highest number of status stars, and therefore red is going to be the guild master. Similarly, because no one else has a pawn assigned to the alchemist, pink has 1 status star in the alchemist guild as a result of that. Now, we haven't seen feudums yet. Feudums are a location that you can get on the board by upgrading a town or by improving a town. Remember, you improve outposts into farms, you improve farms into towns, and then the last step in that chain is to improve a town into a feudum. Now, unlike towns and farms and outposts, feudums are specific to a guild. So, in fact, the feudum tokens, which are, I think, you'll see one soon enough, but I think they're like, you would say, I'd say like a light green in color, not as greenish as the farms are, but and I may be imagining it incorrectly, but in any event, you can tell a feudum because a feudum, there are 6 different kinds of feudum tokens depending upon which guild you're talking about. You can see the imprint of the guild icon on the face of the feudum. So when someone updates or upgrades rather, or improves a town into a feudum, they immediately decide at that point what kind of feudum is it going to be. Is it going to be a farmer's feudum? Is it going to be a merchant's feudum? Is it going to be a noble's feudum, a monk's feudum, whatever? When you have a feudum on the board assigned to a specific guild, because it has to be, that feudum is worth 3 status stars. So that's a huge boost over and above what you get from a pawn. So that recognizes certainly the effort that had to go into improving that town into a feudum, and there's a whole lot more effort that I haven't even talked about yet when you build them when you create a feudum on the board. So that's a huge boost in your status in a guild. If I look at red right now, red has 1 status star. If red, barring anything else, creates a feudum assigned to the Merchant Guild, then red will have 4 status stars, 3 from the feudum and 1 from the pawn. Now there's one other link in the chain, and that is influence, which we haven't seen. You've seen the markers, but you haven't seen the influence actually go on top of a location. I will be talking about this shortly, but suffice it to say that an influence marker can be the ruler of a location. If it's the first influence marker to be placed on a location, it becomes the ruler of that location. Now, every guild is associated with a type of location. If you look at the farmers and the knights guilds, they are linked to farms by this icon. Now, the icon is actually, you can tell that is I made that bigger, more pronounced. That's simply because it gets lost in the translation from in the detail of the board when it gets migrated to the computer screen. So I just wanted to make it more pronounced. So farms and knights are linked to farms. The Merchant Guild and the Nobles Guild are both linked to towns, and the Alchemist Guild and the Monks Guild are both linked to outposts. What that means is, so let's take, again, we'll use red as an example here. Red has this 1 status star in the Merchants Guild because of this pawn. Now, by nature of either having a pawn on the board assigned to a guild or having a feudum on the board assigned to a guild, once you have that, then you could start counting influence that causes you to be a ruler of a type of location that is linked to this guild. So by nature of the fact that I already have a pawn assigned to the Merchant Guild, if I rule a town with an influence marker, that means I get one more status star. So that if, again, barring any other change, right now, if I immediately ruled a town with an influence marker, all of a sudden I would now have 2 status stars, one from the pawn and one from the influence marker. If for one reason or another my pawn leaves the board, and therefore I have no pawn or feudal representation or assignment to the Merchants Guild, that means that my ruler of a town has no impact any longer. The only way a ruler can have an impact is if you already have an entry or a foothold, I use that term, a foothold or some other form of entry into the guild, either by pawn or by feudum. Now, normally, you're going to have a pawn long before you're going to have a feudum. So chances are, if you have a feudum on the board assigned to the guild, you also have a pawn. But that's not necessarily true, because, for example, if I upgrade a town into, if I upgrade a town into a feudum, that doesn't mean I have to create another merchant feudum. I can pick any guild that I want. So I would immediately, as soon as I made that improvement, have 3 status stars just from that feudum in that guild, and it might be enough to make me, that player, become the guild master, if that was a sufficient number of stars to overcome any competition there. But the point is that I have to have that pawn or I have to have that feudum assigned to the guild before I can start counting any locations that I rule using influence markers. And of course, if I do have if I do have influence markers that are ruling towns, those both help pawns and feudums that are linked to the Merchants Guild, as well as any pawns and feudums that are linked to the Nobles Guild, because both of those guilds like towns. Okay. Those are the only 3 sources of status stars for all intents and purposes. The pawn, the feudum. So the pawn is 1, the feudum is 3, and if you have one of those or the other or both, then you could start counting influence ruling locations as well by nature of your influence markers. Okay, enough about that. So as I already said, the guild master at the dawn of each epoch, when you're scoring points for your rank in different guilds. The guild master is worth 5 victory points. The journeyman is worth 3 victory points. The apprentice in a 4 or more player game is worth 1 victory point. But more than that, the guild master has access to what's called the push action. Now I won't be talking about that until much later, and we've got to get past a lot of the other action cards that I have to talk about. But the push action of the guild master is a significant action, because that's what makes the world go round as far as the economy of this game. And then, similar to the push action, is the journeyman's ability to perform what's called a pull action. The pull action and its matching push action both do similar things. The pull action simply does it to a lesser degree. It's because you're the journeyman, so you don't get as much of a benefit from it as you would if you were the guild master. But we'll see that in spades once I start talking about the push and pull and the other guild actions later in this video. Okay, so I want to start talking about what these 11 action cards do. Why would you choose one over the other? How do they work? And so we're gonna start that right now. We're gonna get to the heart of the game here, because at the start of every round, as I said, each player has to secretly choose 4 or 5 action cards that they plan to play over the course of the round. So because these are sort of in order of the way I want to talk about them, I'm simply going to have red choose, and this is not strategic, this is solely for purposes of explanation, but I'm going to have red choose migrate, move, influence, and improve. Those 4 actions. That's going to be what the 4 actions that she's going to play for this round. So that's red's choice. For pink, pretty similarly, I'm going to do migrate, move, influence, improve. But for pink, I'm going to also have pink do the harvest action. Now that's a fifth action, so that means pink has to assign saltpeter to the player pouch to indicate to all the other players that he is going to be performing an extra action. So yes, now I have a saltpeter in the player pouch. It just got shifted from my personal supply here. So now it's broadcasting what my plans are, assuming that the player didn't already see that I was holding 5 cards in my hand. They can see the backs of those cards, but they obviously don't know which actions I'm going to be playing. Okay, I'll commit to that. And now red is still the start player, so red is going to take the first action. Red is going to play the migrate action. The migrate action is what you do when you want to get another pawn onto the board. So in order to migrate another pawn onto the board, first of all, you have to pay a food, which my program will automatically take care of when I perform the migrate. And just like before, you take a pawn, you rotate it so that one of its 6 guilds is face up, and you place the pawn in a location containing one of your other pawns or one of your other influence markers. We haven't seen influence markers yet, but we know what they look like. So you can just imagine that they're going to be sitting on locations just like these pawns are sitting either beside or on top of a location. So I am going to, for purposes of red here, I am going to have red take this knight pawn. So we've already selected the migrate action. Now I'm being told that you can pay 1 food and drag a pawn to a location with another one of your pawns or influence markers. Well, there's only one location where I've got a pawn or an influence marker, and that's this one right here. So this pawn has to go there. So it's going to join the merchant. And there it is. Okay, so now I've got 2 pawns on the board, and you probably saw the message that said now that red is guild master of the Knights Guild. Because again, red has 1 status star in the Knights Guild by nature of this pawn. There's no competition, so red is the guild master. You're going to see that in a 2-player game, there usually is little competition unless the players want to fight for control of certain guilds, depending upon what's happening in the game. Okay, so I'm now going to have pink do the same thing, do a migrate action, but pink's going to have a slightly different ability than red did. If you look at the card for migrate, it shows that you pay a food and you place a pawn onto the board. Now, one other possibility is that you could also take a pawn off the board if you wanted to. You either migrate a pawn onto the board or you migrate a pawn off the board. When you're migrating a pawn off the board, you don't have to pay a food. You only have to pay a food when you're bringing a pawn onto the board. Now, why would you want to take a pawn off the board? Especially because it means you're going to lose some degree of status in the guild that pawn was associated with. Well, maybe you want to change the guild. Maybe you want to have a fight somewhere in some other guild for a guild master. So you decide that you want to reassign a pawn to a different guild. That's the only way to reassign a pawn, by getting it off the board so that you could then migrate it onto the board and assign it to a different guild. Once a pawn is on the board, it stays associated with that guild as long as it remains on the board. The other reason you might want to migrate a pawn off the board is maybe you have 1 pawn over here and another pawn over here, and the second pawn is stuck in this area, and you want to rapidly get it over onto this side of the board. Maybe because you see some battle brewing, or there's some other reason why you feel you need to have better representation on that side of the board at that particular moment. The fastest way to get another pawn over there to join whatever other pawn or influence marker you have over there is to get the pawn off the board, and then in a subsequent migrate action, move the pawn back onto the board into a different location, again, where you've got another pawn or an influence marker. Now, like I said, pink is going to have a different type of migrate action, because if you look down here in the bottom right corner, it indicates that if you have an alchemist on the board, instead of moving a pawn into a location that contains one of your other pawns or influence markers, you also have the option to move the pawn into one of the 6 starting locations, regardless of whether you have any representation there or not. So that's the special ability of having an alchemist on the board. That's the reason why I had pink migrate onto the board with an alchemist. So that now when pink performs the migrate action, pink has an extra option. Pink does not have to just migrate a pawn into this location. Pink can choose to migrate a pawn into any one of the 6 starting locations, regardless of whether, clearly pink does not have a pawn or anything else in those other locations. That's the special ability of having an alchemist somewhere on the board. Doesn't matter where it is, as long as you have it there somewhere, that means you're going to get that special ability. So let's have pink, I'm going to have pink migrate a monk. So let's turn a pawn into a monk, and because I have this ability to migrate the pawn to a location different from where the alchemist is, I'm going to, you know what, I'm not going to move it that far away. I'm just going to indicate the fact that I can move it here if I want to. So that's the special ability of the alchemist, having an alchemist on the board. And now because I've migrated a pawn onto the board that's assigned to the monk guild, now pink is the guild master of the monk guild. So pink now has 2 influence markers assigned to guilds indicating rank or membership, and so does red. Red has these 2 guilds, two of its influence markers assigned. So with that power of becoming a guild master or a journeyman or whatever the case may be, you do have to pay that price of that influence marker. So as you continue to place influence markers on the board, for whatever reason, you're going to have some way of replenishing those. Okay, so that takes care of, that pretty much covers the migrate action. Now I'm going to move into the move action. I'm going to have red perform a move action. Now I should point out and reinforce what I pretty much just alluded to, and that is anytime you perform a migrate action and bring a pawn onto the board or migrate a pawn off the board, you have to reevaluate your status in the guild that that pawn is associated with. So as soon as I brought a monk pawn onto the board for pink, pink has to immediately say, okay, what's my status now in the monk guild? It's increased by 1 status star from whatever it used to be. It was 0 before, now it's 1. Is there any competition? Am I the automatic guild master? Whatever the case may be, you do have to evaluate your status just in that guild that the pawn is associated with, whether you bring it onto the board or migrate it off the board. On the other hand, when you're performing a move action and you're moving a pawn from one location to another, as you'll soon see, that doesn't change anything as far as your rank in a guild is concerned. It just means that strategically or tactically, you want to move your pawn somewhere else so that you might be able to do some other action on some other location. Okay, so let's talk about the move action. So now red is going to select the move action. And you see that I have a movement allowance of 2. That's because you get 1 movement point for every pawn or monster that you have on the board. Now, I won't be talking about monsters in detail until much later on, but suffice it to say that monsters have a certain level, can do a lot of the same things that pawns can do, one of those being contributing to your movement allowance. So if pink did happen, well, red in this case, if red did happen to have not only 2 pawns on the board, but also a monster that it had control of, then red's movement allowance would be 3 instead of 2. If red had another pawn on the board in addition to that monster, then red's movement allowance would be 4. 3 from the pawns and 1 from the monster. Again, I'm not going to talk about monsters anymore. Just suffice it to say that they do add to your movement allowance. Generally speaking, when you're moving pawns around the board, they can always move along roads. And the roads are all these little gray lines that are connecting different locations to one another. So you can see you can get from here, down to here, down to here, down to over to here, all by virtue of having these roads that connect these locations. So when you move a pawn from one location to an adjacent connected location, you're using one of your movement points to do that. And you can always move a pawn along a road. They have no trouble doing that. But there are other kinds of connections as well. For example, there are no roads to get you from here to here. You've got to use some sort of vessel that allows you to transport yourself over water. So there are actually 5 different kinds of routes that exist in the game, roads being one of them. The other routes correspond pretty much to the kinds of vessels that exist in the game. So there's also a submersible route where subs can sort of move you about. And subs are very agile, so they can really move around in tight spaces, perhaps where ships can't go. So for example, to get from here to here, I could use a sub. Subs are represented on this map by these green lines that I've created to show. Now, clearly, if you're using the game board, the board is big enough that you could very easily see if there's a sub route there, because sub routes are represented by bubbles. But if I even zoom in, you can see that the picture starts getting fuzzy, and you can kind of see the little bubbles there, but that connect that green location to the outpost. But it's just not viable to do it that way. So instead, I simply right-click, or I simply right-click on a location so I can see what my options are. So green represents submarine routes. Blue represents ship routes, places I can go by using a ship. And light blue represents routes that I can take that are flying machine routes or airships. So you can see that this location is connected to this one only by nature of having a flying machine. But I can get from this location to this location either with a submarine or a ship, because there's both a green line and a blue line going that way. Now, ship routes are represented by little waves. So again, it's going to be hard to see, but since I already know that there is both bubbles and waves connecting this green location and this purple outpost, but again, you can see that it's pretty fuzzy. You can kind of see the little bubbles that sort of stand out, and then the other things are little waves. But it's just not feasible to make them out this way, so that's why I have this other way that just simply shows me I can get from here to here by simply having either a ship or a submersible. But there you can see that there is no road that connects this location to this location. I do have to use one of those other 2 vessels to get me from here to here or from here to here. So I've covered 4 of the 5 routes. That's roads, submarine routes, ship routes, and flying machine routes. Flying machine routes are represented by little birds. And again, I don't think you're going to see it too well, but if I come over here, this thing that connects this green farm over to this yellow town, these little lines here are actually little bird lines. They kind of look like waves, except they're bird wings, so they're inverted. But it's, like I said, it's much easier to make out when you're looking on the actual board. And you do have to understand that many routes have routes that connect locations do have overlapping icons. So, to get from here to here, you'll see both submarine bubbles as well as ship waves, all sort of nested in with one another. Much easier to see on the board, suffice it to say. The flying machine routes are not as obvious, only because they don't necessarily go through water. You could see there's a flying route here. It does actually stand out better against the color of the Badlands. So you can see these sort of flying birds that are going up into the air to get from here to here. This happens to be one of the more isolated locations. Actually, or is it this one? You could see, the only way I can get to this location, number 13, is by going from here to here by road, or by going from here to here using the fifth type of route that I haven't talked about, and that's the ferryboat route. The ferryboat route which is not that common. There are only a couple places on the board where you'll find ferry boat routes. I'm just going to sort of right-click randomly. I don't remember. There's one that connects location 20 to 21. So to use a ferry boat, you've got to pay 2 shillings for the one-way trip. So to get from here to here, I pay 2 shillings. If for some reason I wanted to turn around and go back the next time I do a move action, I'd have to pay another 2 shillings to go return to that location. But there's a big catch. As long as the alchemist has vessels for sale, and the alchemist starts the game by having 2 vessels for sale, in this case randomly the flying machine and the ship, as long as the alchemist has ships for sale in its guild, you can't use ferry boat routes. They're simply off limits. And because of that, by nature of the fact that more often than not, the Alchemist Guild usually has something on sale, not always, depending upon what's happening in gameplay. I mean, one player might have a dire need for a flying machine, and another player might have a dire need for a ship, and nobody else happens to be stocking the Alchemist with more vessels. So as long as those vessels are gone and there's nothing else there for sale, then ferry boat routes are open. But as soon as another vessel goes on sale in the Alchemist Guild, ferry boat routes immediately close. Okay, so I've covered all the different kinds of routes. Let's actually see the move action. Let's actually see it happen. So I've already clicked the move action for red. Red's move allowance is 2 movement points. And I'm going to have, now I could use those 2 movement points any way I want. I could have one pawn move 2 locations, assuming it could move those 2 locations. Right now, I don't have any vessels, so clearly I'm stuck using roads. Or I could have each pawn move 1 location. Or I could have one pawn move 1 location and decide I don't want to even use my other movement point. It's whatever you want to do. So I am going to have I'm going to have red, I think, move the merchant. Where do I want to have red move the merchant? Yeah, I'm going to have the red move the merchant this way to the northwest. Again, these 2 locations are connected by roads, and so are these 2 locations connected by roads. So I'm now going to move my knight pawn from this location up to this farm. And you can see that my program shows a circle indicating that that is a valid location where the knight can move to. I've now used up my movement allowance. I can't move any longer. When your move action is complete, at that point, if one of the pawns you moved or one of the monsters you moved is in a location where there happens to be a good on the board, because one thing I didn't make note of the fact is that when before the game even started, we placed 6 goods on the board. They're random goods, but the locations where the goods showed up are very strictly defined. At the beginning of the game, you put a good in the northernmost location of each region. So this location is the northernmost location in the desert region. This one's the northernmost location in the sea region. This one happens to be the northernmost location in the forest region. If you just look at these 3, you can see this one's just a little higher toward the top. So, if it's unclear which one's north and which one's not north, all you have to do is just look at there are little letters on the board next to these locations, so you can see that, okay, this one's assigned north, this one's assigned east, this one's assigned south, and so forth. So at the dawn of each epoch, at the beginning of the game, you stock 6 locations with 6 northern locations, I should say, with goods drawn randomly from the haversack. The haversack is simply the bag that contains all these cubes. In the dawn of Epoch 2, we'll be doing the same thing, stocking the most eastern location in each region with a good. And then in the dawn of Epoch 3, we'll be stocking the southernmost location. And then finally, at the dawn of Epoch 4, we'll be stocking the westernmost location in each region with a good. And sometimes the eastern and the northern, or the eastern and the southern, happens to be the same location. So sometimes there's a little bit of overlap, but you can always go by the letters that are next to the locations on the big board. Okay, so what was I trying to say? Well, once you completed your move action, if any of the pawns or monsters, for that matter, that were involved in the actual move action are now adjacent to in a location where there happens to be a good, you are allowed to pilfer one of those goods. You can't pilfer more than one good, but you can pilfer just one good, but you have to use a pawn or monster that actually was involved in the move action. Well, in the case of red, both of these pawns moved, so but this one is the only one that happens to be at a location where there's a good, so I can have red pick up this saltpeter now, and now red has 2 saltpeter to her name. Having extra saltpeter is not a bad thing at all. Okay, so now it is that was red's turn. Now it's pink's turn. Now I'm going to have pink do a move action as well, but once again, pink's going to have another special ability. I don't know why I'm picking pink out to be the favorite, but you can see that not only can pink do a move action, but because pink has a pawn somewhere on the board, a monk somewhere on the board, that monk is allowed to do 1 extra movement at the end of your move action. Now, you may have multiple monks on the board, but only one of them can take that special ability. It's totally optional if you want to do it, but it can be done. Again, that's a special ability of having a monk on the board, and it has to be one of the monks that takes that extra action. So I am going to have pink do a move action, and I'm not going to do anything terribly smart here. I'm going to move the monk this way, again via the road. I'm going to move this alchemist to where that monk just was, up here. It's kind of foolish, but I'm going to do it. And now my move action is officially over because I've used my 2 movement points, but because of the monk's special ability, I can move one of my monk pawns 1 additional space if I wanted to. And then think about pilfering a good, because the pilfering, the moving the monk the extra space has to be the next to the last thing you do in your movement action after everything else is moved. So now the pawn could take its optional movement, so I'm going to move my pawn over there. And now that the monk has taken its special ability, so my move turn is completely over unless I want to do a pilfer. And I can have this alchemist pilfer this wood, or I could have this monk pilfer this iron over here. Yeah, I think I'll take the iron. So I'll have this monk pilfer the iron, and now my iron supply in pink has gone up to 2. Once again, I want to reiterate the fact that when you move pawns or monsters around the board, you are not reevaluating your status in the guilds. Moving pawns around does not change anything as far as guilds are concerned. Okay, next action we're going to take a look at is the influence action. When you're performing the influence action, you can place 1 influence marker per location where you have a pawn. So both of my pawns were still at the same location. I could still only place 1 influence marker there. But now that red has 2 pawns at 2 different locations, I can potentially place 2 influence markers when I perform the influence action. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to have red place an influence marker here because I've got a pawn here. And I'm going to have red place an influence marker here because I have a pawn here at this location. Because it's the only influence marker at those 2 locations, that means that I now will rule those 2 locations, because that influence marker is going to effectively become the ruler of each of those locations. And you denote that by placing the influence marker right on the location disk. So I'm going to place an influence marker here, and now I'm ruler of this farm. And I can place an influence marker here, and I'm going to be the ruler of this farm. So you can see that red is going big into farm rulership. Now, it doesn't mean anything for the Farmer Guild because red has no representation in the Farmers Guild. But red is the guild master of the Knights Guild. And before, red only had 1 status star, but now if we take a look, we're going to see that, oh yeah, red now has 3 status stars. because she not only has a knight on the board, but she now, in addition to that pawn, she rules farms, 2 farms. And since farms are associated with the Knights Guild, that means she's got 2 extra status stars that she can count for purposes of her Guildmaster status. So that's what I'm going to do with red. So I'm going to also have pink perform the influence action. Now, before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about influence markers and what the limitations are. In any one location, there can't be more than 3 influence markers, 2 from one player and 1 from another player. So not only are you limited to the total number of influence markers being 3 in any one location, two from one player and 1 from another, but also you can never have more than 2 players affect a location with influence markers. You just, if I was playing a 3 or 4 player game and red and pink both had an influence marker of theirs in any one location, some other color player couldn't just decide to come in now and place an influence marker there. It's not allowed. You can't, only 2 players can be represented by influence markers in one location, and either one of those could possibly have 2 influence markers, but you can't never have more than 3. So remember I said that the first influence marker is the ruler of that location. The second influence marker that goes in, that happens, if it's assigned to another player, that influence marker becomes the serf at that location. And it's sort of like the journeyman having second billing next to the guildmaster. But once again, being the serf is not such a bad thing, because the serfs do have other abilities that they can do that rulers cannot. So if we now have the situation where we have one player being the ruler in one location and the other player being the serf in that location, because each one of them have 1 influence marker, like I said, either one of them could then place 1 more influence marker, either to cement their rule over that location or to usurp rule of that location. So if I had red and pink both in this location with influence markers, where red was the ruler and pink was the serf, if red decided to place a second influence marker in that location, which would be the last one that could be placed, red would then be reinforcing her rule in that location, and it would be pretty tough to knock her out, because at that point she not only has a ruler, but she has a subject. So the third influence marker becomes the ruler's subject in that location. And that pretty much cements your rule over that location, because once you've got those 2 influence markers there, nobody else can come in there and knock you out by simply bringing in more influence, because you are limited to a total of 3 influence. If, on the other hand, we had the situation where red had 1 influence marker and pink had 1 influence marker, and pink happened to come in first to place his second influence marker before red did, then pink would usurp rule from red. Pink would then suddenly become the ruler and the subject by nature of having its 2 influence markers there, and then red would be bumped down into the serf position. So that's pretty much how influence markers work. Now, for the time being, I'm not going to have any particular competition. I don't, you know what? Maybe I should have had this pawn come down here instead of up there, just to create a little bit of, yeah, you know what, I'm going to do that. I'm going to cheat here. You're not seeing this, but I'm going to cheat and use a trick that allows me to move this pawn down here, as if it would have been totally legal for that pawn when it was here to move down here instead of up there. I just decided to change my mind because I want to have a situation where I've got 2 pawns of different players in the same location. So now pink is going to perform the influence action. And pink is going to influence this farm, become the ruler of that farm, because pink has a farm there. That doesn't help him over here in the Alchemist Guild, because alchemists like outposts, not farms. And it doesn't help him where he's the guild master of the monks guild, because that's the opposite corner, and they also like outposts rather. So being the ruler of a farm doesn't help Monk in the same way that being a ruler of a farm helped Red, because of the fact that she was guild master in the Night Guild. But now Pink is going to come over here and place an influence marker as well, which you can do. But because Red has already become the ruler there, Pink coming in second is only going to be able to be the serf. But now what actually happens next in this location means that both Red and Pink are up for grabs in terms of who's really going to be the ultimate ruler there. Because potentially either one of them could come in, place their second influence marker, and Red would either reinforce her rule of that location, or Pink would overturn her rule of that location and suddenly become the ruler and the subject, making Red bumping Red down to the side and moving Pink on top of the location, being the new ruler of that location. But again, that's the most that can happen. One of these players can now add one more influence marker, and then that's the limit of influence markers that can go in that location. Now, there is another special ability that I didn't talk about because it didn't really apply in this case. But again, if I bring the influence card back up on the screen, I'm going to show that if there's a merchant at a location where you're placing an influence marker, if it's only you against the ruler, because the ruler doesn't have a subject, if there's a merchant there at that location, then you can use the special ability of that merchant, which is called Money is Influence. You can pay 1 shilling to immediately bump the ruler into the serf position, and you take over as ruler. Unfortunately, Pink does not have a merchant on the board, so Pink wasn't able to do that. But if the roles happen to be reversed and this Red's merchant was over here, then maybe if Pink placed an influence marker first, then Red would be able to use that ability, pay a shilling, and bump Pink off as the ruler, becoming the new ruler, even though it was a 1 against 1 influence marker versus 1 influence marker type of competition. That's the special ability of the merchant when it comes to the influence action. Okay, so that's influence. And like I said, influence markers either are rulers or serfs or subjects, depending upon their circumstances. So last but not least, at least as far as Red is concerned, I'm going to demonstrate the improve action. By the way, because I'm placing influence markers down when I do an influence action, because as you already saw, influence markers could possibly become rulers, and rulers could possibly affect guild status. You do have to reevaluate your guild status when you place an influence marker, because that 1 extra status star may be just what you need to bump the guild master back down to the journeyman position, so that you could take its place as guild master of the guild. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the improve action. The improve action is the third action that is potentially impacts your membership in a guild. So I'm going to have Red perform the improve action first. And again, if you take a look at the card for the improve action, and it's also repeated down here in this message box, you can pay 1 wood to improve an outpost into a farm. Or you could pay 1 iron to improve a farm into a town. Or you can pay 1 king's seal to improve a town into a feudum. And by the way, it's got to be a location that you're the ruler of to do the improvement, goes without saying. So Pink would not be able to do an improve action here, but Red could, because Red is now the ruler. So Red can improve either one of these farms into a town. So I'm going to have Red improve this farm to a town by paying an iron. It costs 1 iron to go from a farm into a town. And now, because Red's ruler is no longer going to be ruling a farm, but instead is going to be ruling a town, that means that potentially your membership in one of the guilds is going to change. Remember, we did say that the fact that red is ruler of these two farms is giving the Knight Guild, the Red's Guildmaster status in the Knight Guild, 3 status stars now, 1 from the pawn, 2 from being rulers. As soon as I improve this farm into a town, suddenly the status stars over here for Red in the Knights Guild are going to fall to 2, because now she's only has the pawn and the ruler of this one farm. But her guild status in the Merchants Guild is going to increase by a status star, because now she's going to be ruling a town. And so this 1 status star over here is going to become 2 status stars. So that's what Red is going to do. She is going to pay 1 iron, improve this to a town. And when you improve a location, a couple things happen. First of all, it means that you might possibly be able to get a region tile. So when you improve a town, when you improve any location, be it an outpost into a farm into a town into a feudum, you immediately look down at the stack. There are 6 stacks of region tiles here, all with the Epic 1 label on them. And these happen to be piles of 4 region tiles each. So this each stack consists of a 1, an Epic 2 beneath it, an Epic 3 beneath that, and an Epic 4 tile beneath that. So when you improve a location in a particular region, you go to that particular stack, because each one of these is assigned to a particular region. This one's assigned to the sea region. This one's assigned to the islands region. This one forest. This one desert. This one badlands, and this one mountains. You can barely make out the little icons here, so they are a little blurry. Again, not blurry at all on the board. I probably should have made those clearer, but it was, you know, I played the game enough that I know that that sea, it's simply sea, and then islands, and then forest, badlands. It's pretty much going from left to right across the map, just like these are going left to right across the bottom of the board. So because Red improved a location in the desert region, Red could potentially remove the region tile from the desert stack. You can only remove and take possession of the region tile on the top of the stack in that region if it's from the current epic or an earlier epic. Now, the tile that was there was Epic 1. That's the current epic that we're in. So Red had no problem taking that region tile. But what has Red now done? Red has now revealed the fact that there's an Epic 2 tile here instead of an Epic 1, and we're still in Epic 1. That means that if anybody else improves another location in the desert, they're not going to be able to take that tile because it's not from the current or earlier epic. If you are able to take the tile because it is from the current epic or an earlier epic, then you do score points for the improvement. And the number of points you score is simply based on this little chart down here that says if you're improving to a farm in Epic 1, you get 2 points. If you're improving to a town in Epic 1, you get 3 points. If you're improving to a feudum in Epic 1, you get 4 points. In Epic 2, you're going to get 3, 4, 5. In Epic 3, you're going to get 4, 5, or 6. And finally, in Epic 4, you're going to get 5, 6, or 7 points. Only if you're able to remove the region tile from that stack because it happens to come from the current epic or an earlier epic. So that's why there's a race to be the first player to improve a particular location in any one region, because that's the only way you're going to score points if you're able to improve a location in a region where the tile is still from the current or earlier epic. If it's not, you can still get a region tile from another stack, but number one, the region tile from the other stack has to come from an earlier epic. It can't come from the current epic. And since there's no epic earlier than Epic 1, you're pretty much out of luck in Epic 1. You're not going to find another region tile that's earlier than Epic 1. But even if you are able to find a tile from an earlier epic, you don't get to score points. You get the tile and the benefit of having the region tile, but you don't get to score the points associated with it. All right. So if you take a look at the situation, red did get this region tile from the desert. And what red got, and red did score 3 points because red improved a farm into a town. So in Epic 1, when you improve to a town from a farm, you get 3 points. What did red get? Red got an orchard. There are 4 types of landscape tiles, or region tiles as they're called. There are orchards that ultimately could produce food if they're planted on the board. There are silver mines that ultimately can produce shillings. There are sulfur mines, which, not surprisingly, can ultimately produce sulfur. And lastly, the 4th type of region tile is what's called an archery butt. The type of resource that is produced by archery butts are archery targets. Archery targets are a generic resource that, when cashed in, get converted into influence markers. Pink is also going to do an improve action, but pink is going to take a different kind of improve action. So it's pink's turn now, so I'm going to go over here to pink. Pink is going to perform this improve action, but instead of doing the top action, pink's going to do the action down in the corner. In the case of the improve action, there's a double-headed arrow here that indicates that you either do the regular improve action or you do the secondary improve action. We've already seen the example of the primary improve action. It's to convert an outpost into a farm, or a farm into a town, or a town into a feudum by paying wood or iron or a king's seal. Again, it's got to be a location where you're the ruler in order to do it. So that's signified by an influence marker being on top of that particular location. What this action does is something entirely different. This is an action aimed at serfs, not at rulers. This says that if you're a serf at a location, you can take a region tile and effectively build it at that location and have your serf take control of that landscape tile. So if I'm going to have pink perform this action, pink has to have a region tile in order to plant here where pink happens to be a serf. This is the only place where I have a serf so far. So if pink is going to use this action, pink has got to have a region tile. Well, pink doesn't have a region tile. So I'm going to have to cheat and give it one. So I'm going to come down here and I am going to cheat and pretend that pink, previous to this round or in some earlier turn, happened to do what red did and happened to get, I'll give pink an archery butt. So pink now has an archery butt that produces archery targets, and they look like that. So there's the archery butt, there's the archery target, and here's the generic resource that represents influence markers. So I cheated, I gave pink a region tile, and now pink can do this secondary action. And if you look more closely, you can see that you've got to pay 1 wood to place a tile where you are the serf at the location, and you get to score 2 points for doing that. So it's almost as good as a regular improve action, but clearly not as good because you're only getting 2 points out of it. Although you're getting a guaranteed 2 points. If you do the regular improve action, you're not getting anything necessarily unless you get that region tile from the current or earlier epic. So as soon as I double click it, pink pays the wood, places the landscape tile there. You know, the rules tend to call them region tiles when they're down here. When they're on the board, they're no longer region tiles, they're considered landscapes. I guess they're called region tiles because they're kept face down and hidden from other players. So as long as you can see the region on the top side, they're called a region tile. And as soon as you flip them over and you see the landscape side, then all of a sudden they're called landscape tiles instead. So pink has revealed that pink happened to have an archery butt. Pink is the serf here. Pink paid their wood. They got their 2 points. And now they are a serf tending this landscape. And the landscape immediately gets 3 resources that accumulate on that tile. And the 3 resources vary depending upon what type of landscape it is. It's 3 food if it's an orchard. It's 3 sulfur if it's a sulfur mine. It's 3 shilling if it's a silver mine, or it's 3 archery targets if it's an archery butt. And as soon as those 3 resources are placed on the tile, the serf who is tending that landscape has the choice of either taking the resources, paying 1 to the ruler, or leaving them there and having them ride. So there are pros and cons to both. If you let the resource ride, I should point out that at the dawn of every epoch, when you're doing epic scoring, if you are tending a landscape, you're going to get 4 points for that landscape if it has at least 1 resource on it. But if it's empty, because either all the resources have been pilfered by other players, or you decided to simply take them because you figured that you desperately needed that particular resource for one reason or another, then you only get 2 points. So empty landscapes are worth 2 points at the beginning of an epic, but landscapes that have 1 or more resources on them are worth 4 points. And after that scoring that determines whether you get 2 or 4 points, at the dawn of every epic, another 3 resources go on top of the landscapes. And once again, every serf who tends that landscape has the option either to let it ride or cash it in. If you let it ride, you just let those resources accumulate on the landscape. The downside, I suppose, is that they could potentially be pilfered to a certain degree, but it's unlikely they're all going to get pilfered by the time the next epic comes around. So it's unlikely they're all going to disappear. But if you decide that you desperately need them, you can take them at the time you create the landscape tile, or at the time that at the start of every epic when 3 more resources get placed on that landscape tile after the scoring round is done. So is Pink going to take the 3 archery targets, or is Pink going to let them be? I think I'm going to have Pink let them be. But if Pink did decide to take them, Pink would take the 3 archery targets, return them to the supply, cash them in for 2 influence markers belonging to Pink, but because Pink has to pay 1 resource to the ruler of the location, Red, is going to get 1 of her resource markers, or 1 of her influence markers added to her supply. So that's one way to get influence markers, by tending an archery butt and cashing in the resources to get more influence markers. But you are going to be giving 1 to your opponent, at least 1 of your opponents, the one who happens to be the ruler of that location. So Pink is going to say no. I'm just going to let those 3 resources remain on that region, on that landscape tile. Now there is one other way you could spend region tiles, and it's important that I don't gloss over this. You don't necessarily have to build the landscape on the board using the tend landscape function that you just saw. Instead, you could cash in a region tile for a good of your choice anytime you want. So if you find that, oh my gosh, it's late in the game, I'm running low on food, I've got to nourish my ponds. Oh, I happen to have a spare region tile in my supply. They're not worth any points if they're not on the board, so I'll just cash it in to get a food so I can avoid not nourishing that pond. So that's, at any point in time, it's a free action. You just immediately cash the region tile in, you discard it to the supply or to the discard pile, because you won't see that region tile again. And then you take a good of your choice. It could be food, it could be saltpeter, it could be sulfur. If you did sulfur, you could decide then and there whether to put it in your wine barrel or to take it into your personal supply. It's your option entirely. So region tiles are either exchanged for a good of your choice, or they are built using the tend landscape feature if you have a serf on the board. Okay. It is Pink's turn because Red is out of cards. Red only played 4 action cards, so it doesn't have any more action cards to play. But Pink, remember, did spend 1 saltpeter to take to be able to take a 5th action. So Pink is going to get another turn. Sort of like a sequential action, because red didn't do 4 actions, so now pink is effectively getting another action by having paid that saltpeter. And pink is going to do a harvest action. In order to do the harvest action, you have to be the ruler of a farm. You might be the ruler of multiple farms, but only one of the farms can actually be harvested. When you harvest a farm, you immediately draw 5 goods from the haversack at random. Of course, it's always done blindly. And 1 extra good for every other farm or feudum you have on the board. So if I happen to have 2 farms and a feudum, and I decide to harvest at one of those farms, I get to take 5 goods for the farm itself, 1 extra good for the other farm, and another extra good for the feudum. So that would be a total of a harvest of 7 goods. One other way you can increase the value of your harvest is by owning rosary beads. You can think of rosary beads that usually come from the monk as being, well, for all intents and purposes, they do come from the monk. It's the only place you can get a rosary bead. You can think of rosary beads as providing the farmer with some sort of prayer for a bountiful harvest. Or if the rosary bead happens to be adorning a chicken in the farmyard, then you can think of it as the monk blessing the chicken so that the chicken can bring great value to the farmer, either because it becomes plump and is good on somebody's dinner table, or it lays a lot of eggs, or whatever you were hoping for in the way of your chickens, if you happen to be the farmer. So Miss Allison is very happy if 1 or more of her chickens are blessed by the monk with these rosary beads. And remember, rosary beads are just the other side of a king's seal. And the game starts with 1 rosary bead blessing 1 of the 4 chickens in the farmyard. Okay, so we're going to do this harvest action. So I was saying that you get 5 basic goods. You get 1 extra good for every farm and feudum that you rule, every farm that you rule, and every feudum that's on the board that you rule. And you get extra goods part of your harvest for any rosary beads that you own. And in those cases, you get the actual value of the rosary bead. So if I happen to actually own a rosary bead of value 2, I get an additional 2 goods as part of my harvest. If I happen to have a number 2 and a number 3 rosary bead, I'd get an additional 5 goods as part of my harvest at that farm of my choice. But you can never harvest more than 10 goods. So if you add up all your farms and your feudums, and you have to start with the 5 basic goods, and you also look at any rosary beads that you own, even if the number is more than 10, you can't harvest more than 10 goods. And furthermore, you can't harvest at a farm that already has 10 or more goods on it. I think that rule is there simply for practical purposes. You don't want just a million cubes surrounding any one location. I mean, worst possible case is that you happen to have a farm that has 9 goods around it, and you harvest there because that's allowed, and you harvest with another 10 goods. Well, all of a sudden, now that farm has 19 good cubes strewn about it. So that's the worst case. It's unlikely that's going to happen, but it's possible, I suppose, that you have 19 little goods cubes stacked up around any one particular farm. In Pink's case, Pink only rules 1 farm, and it doesn't own any other farms or feudums, and it doesn't have any rosary beads, so it's only going to be able to harvest 5 goods. Now, when you do a harvest action, you also have the option of taking kickbacks, or the nicer word for that, the anachronism in the game is called favors. There's a little chart on the harvest card that shows you that if you harvest a total of 5 goods, 4 of them are part of the harvest, and if you're deciding to take a favor, you get 1 favor. Meaning that one of those goods at random goes into your personal supply. So instead of all 5 goods going around the farm, 4 goods go there, and you get 1 as a favor or a kickback. Same holds true when you're doing a harvest of 6 goods. If your yield happened to come out to 6, 5 would go around the farm, and if you decided you wanted to take the favor, one would come to you in the form of a favor. Best case is that you have a harvest of the maximum of 10 goods. At that point, you actually, if you decide to take favors, 6 goods at random go around the farm. You get to take 4 goods at random from the haversack to make up for your favors or your kickbacks. But if you have a farmer on the board, you get to choose which of the random goods that were drawn as part of the harvest, which ones you want to keep for your harvest. Unfortunately, Pink does not have a farmer on the board, so Pink is not going to get that special benefit. So when Pink does the harvest, it's simply going to get 4 random goods around the farm if Pink chooses to take the kickbacks, and Pink is going to get 1 kickback in the form of a random good from the haversack. But if Pink did have a farmer, then you would draw 5 goods, and Pink would choose which one he wanted to keep, and which 4 would then go around the farm. Having goods around a farm means that you can later cash those goods in at the Farmers Guild for either shillings or food. So we'll hopefully see that action later. But that's ultimately what the benefit of a harvest is, that you harvest the goods now in hopes of later basically taking them to market at the Farmers Guild and cashing them in for either food or shillings of your choice at 2 for 1. So for every 2 goods that you cash in, you get your choice, a shilling or a food. So if later Pink decided to take the 4 or 5 goods that were at this farm and cash them in at the Farmers Guild, Pink would get either 2 food for his trouble, or 2 shillings, or 1 food and 1 shilling. Again, 1 of those for every 2 goods cashed in, rounded down. The other downside to taking favors is that it's kind of frowned upon by the church, because you're effectively using the blessings of the rosary beads to improve your yield, and now you're turning around to steal some of that yield in the form of kickbacks. So if you happen to take favors as part of your harvest action, you've got to flip any rosary beads that you have to their other side onto the King's Seal side. The disadvantage is that those rosary beads will no longer provide you a more bountiful harvest in the future, but now you've got King Seals, whereas before you had rosary beads, and you could use the King Seals for perhaps upgrading to a Feudum, or for sealing a Royal Writ card, which we haven't really seen yet, but some Royal Writs need a King Seal so that you can get endgame scoring points. All right, so we're going to do this harvest action for Pink. There's only one place it could go, this particular farm. Pink's got to decide, am I going to do it with favors or am I going to do it without favors? Well, I don't have any rosary beads right now, so there's really no downside to me taking a favor. Especially, not only am I not flipping any rosary beads to their King Seal side, so that's irrelevant, but in the case of a harvest of 5, all I'm getting is 1 favor. So I'm leaving a harvest of 4, and cashing in 4 goods at the Farmers Guild is no different from cashing in 5. Either way, I'm only going to get 2 good food and or shillings for them. So I might as well take the favor. So I'm going to go ahead and say, yes, I'm going to take the favor. You do get an automatic 1 point for doing a harvest. If you look at the harvest card, there's a symbol for 1 point up there in the top left-hand corner. Lock that in place. Okay, there is the 1 point indication that you get a point for doing a harvest of any yield. Doesn't matter. Okay, so what happened here? Okay, Pink's favor or kickback happened to be a sulfur. So Pink has got to decide, do I want to have it go in the wine barrel or do I want to take it into my personal supply? Well, Pink doesn't have any sulfur in a wine barrel the way Red does, so Pink is going to say, sure, I'll stick it in my wine barrel to preserve my wine and possibly use it to nourish one of my ponds at the end of the round. Okay, so now both Pink, it looks more purple than it does pink, doesn't it? Both Pink and Red have a sulfur in their wine barrel, and the other goods that Pink happened to get were 2 more sulfur, a wood, and a food. Now, these goods that are at this farm, as long as they sit there, are available for pilfering by opponents. You can never pilfer from your own farm, because that's like stealing from yourself. Also, you can never pilfer from your own landscape. So the fact that Pink's got a farm now, and Pink also is tending a landscape, if Pink is doing one of these move actions and moving pawns around the board, Pink cannot take one of these archery targets and pilfer it, nor can Pink pilfer one of these goods, because the farm and the archery both belong to Pink. So there's no point. Stealing from yourself is totally illogical. But if Red is moving and moves into the location with Pink's archery butt, or into the location where Pink has got those goods at the farm, then Red could pilfer one of those resources at that location if they happen to move one of their pawns or monsters into that location as part of their move action. Okay, so everyone has completed now all their actions, and now it's time to proceed into the Nourish Pawns phase. So that's pretty straightforward. You basically go around and you decide, okay, how are you going to pay for this pawn? Are you going to pay a food, or are you going to pay a sulfur, or are you completely out of food and wine, and therefore you're going to pay by being forced to migrate the pawn off the board. When you're nourishing pawns, it's mandatory that you nourish them as long as you have wine or food on hand. Only if you don't have any wine and don't have any food, then being forced to migrate the pawn off the board because for lack of nourishment. I'm going to click continue to go into the Nourish Pawns phase, and now Pink has got to decide, what am I going to do for this alchemist? Do I want to nourish it with the wine I've got in the wine barrel, or do I want to nourish it with a food? I'm going to have Pink decide to nourish this alchemist with food, not wine. Remember I said that wine makes you intoxicated, and therefore in battle it weakens your ability to perform in battle. I think I'm going to demonstrate a battle at some point at this location down the road, so I want Pink to be nice and sober and alert in order to be able to perform well in that battle. So I'm going to say, just give this guy a food. When you nourish a pawn with food, you're only satisfying its needs for that round only, and only that round. But if you decide to nourish a pawn with wine and get it inebriated, at least the wine lasts longer. So you're not only nourishing it this round, but you're also nourishing it next round. And you basically indicate that by taking the sulfur that's in the wine barrel and putting it right on top of the pawn. So the pawn basically carries the sulfur around with it, so that when you're doing next round's nourish phase, you then remove the pawn, you remove the sulfur good from on top of the pawn to indicate that now you're getting the second round's benefit of that wine. And then the wine is worn off and the pawn is no longer drunk. All right, so I am going to have Pink nourish that pawn with its wine in its wine barrel. So the wine barrel, the sulfur goes away, and the sulfur cube goes on top of the pawn. Now in my program, I just have a little stuck here in the corner. It was easier to do it than, well, not. I just didn't want to cover up the face of the pawn because they're not that big, and I didn't want to cover it with another token that made it hard to see what guild the pawn was associated with. So I just kind of stick it on the corner. Okay, now Red has to choose. Red is deciding about its merchant pawn on location 18. I am going to choose to feed that with food. So I'm going to say no, feed it with food, not wine. So one food gets paid in order to feed this merchant. You probably saw it decrease. But this pawn I am going to feed with wine. Not a smart move, because I just admitted that Pink's about to attack Red in a future round. So having Red get drunk means that Red is not going to be able to defend very well with that pawn in that location. But Red's not being too smart here. Red's going to just get drunk and party away the night. So yes, I'm going to use the sulfur in my wine barrel to basically nourish that pawn both for this round. Yeah, I say Red's drunken night. Not only in this round, but that sulfur is going to last into next round as well. After the Nourish Pawns phase, one other thing happens. You roll the progress die, which just is another die that is a six-sided and has one guild on every side, one per face. And you roll it until you come up with a side that comes from an earlier or current epic, just like as if you did an improve action. That ensures that if players aren't doing the improve action, one way or another, you remove region tiles from stacks. You're either helping speed along the game by doing this, or you're just keeping the game from stalling by doing this. Because if players aren't improving any locations, it means the only way that region tiles are going to get removed from stacks is when you roll the progress die. So now we've revealed another Era 2. If I roll the progress die that came up with oh, actually, what did I say? It has the guilds on every side. It doesn't have the guilds on every side. It has a region icon on every side, every face of the die. So if I happen to roll the desert region on the progress die, I would not remove this region tile because it's not from the current epic or earlier. It's from a later epic. So I would re-roll the die and until I got a result that was from a current or earlier epic. If all the region tiles, none of them were from the current or earlier epic, I would not roll the progress die at all. I would simply just skip that part of that phase and move on to the next round. Now you know that Epic 1 is done and we're moving into the dawn of Epic 2 when 4 Epic 2 tiles are showing. So we're only halfway there to ending Epic 1. And so therefore we simply move right into round 2 of Epic 1 and repeat the same things we just did, possibly with different actions this time around. But as soon as you've got 4 Region 2 tiles showing, you know that at the end of that particular round, you're going to trigger the end of the epic and move into the dawn of the next epic, do dawn of epic scoring. When you give the guild masters 5 points and the journeyman 4 points, and you score for landscape tiles and assorted other things as well. And you accumulate more resources, and there's a whole slew of different things that happen during that dawn of epic, and I'll talk more about that soon. What also happens in between rounds is that the first player marker gets moved to the next player clockwise in turn order. So now pink is the starting player instead of red. So red's going to choose first here. Red is going to choose move, influence, explore, and conquer, because like I said, I wanted to demonstrate an attack over here using the conquer action. I'm also going to have red do the guild action. Now that's 5 actions. Pink. Have pink do the guild action. That's 5 actions. Pink would have to pay a saltpeter. Pink doesn't have any saltpeter. So turn away so you don't see that I'm cheating and giving pink a saltpeter. So now I'm going to be able to cheat and let pink perform an extra action here. So I'm going to have pink do that, move the saltpeter onto its player pouch, and now pink is going to be doing these 5 actions in some order in the incoming round 2. For red happens to have 2 saltpeter, the one it still had from the beginning of the game and the one that it pilfered when it moved up into this location, if you recall. So I'm going to have red choose to do an improve attacks action. We haven't seen that yet. I'll have it do the defend action, which is sort of the opposite of conquer. And I'll also have red perform a guild action and the repeat action, which is the other action that I haven't demonstrated yet. Now that's the 5th action that red's choosing, so it's being asked to commit to placing the saltpeter on the player pouch, which red is going to do. So now both pink and red are indicating that they are each taking 5 actions this round. Okay, so pink goes first. And for pink's first action, I am going to have, I think I want to be able to, I'm thinking about moving this pawn into over here to get a saltpeter, because I'm obviously hurting for saltpeter. But to do that, I'm going to need a vessel to get this pond transported over the water. Now, to get from here to here, I either need a ship or a submarine. You can see there's both a blue line and a green line. So if you look more closely, they're both bubbles and waves connecting these two locations. Unfortunately, the only way you can get a vessel pretty much is by buying it at the Alchemist Guild. And the Alchemist Guild only has a ship for sale. It doesn't have a submarine. So if Pink's going to do anything, it's going to use a guild action to go over there and trade with the Alchemist and buy a ship. And that's going to lead me into the guild action. And now I'm going to basically take a break from the walkthrough, because the guild action there's a lot of different things you can do when you do a guild action. So I literally have to stop and describe all the possibilities. There are 12 of them, effectively, because you could either trade at any one of the 6 guilds, you could push at any one of the 6 guilds if you're the guild master, or you could pull at any one of the 6 guilds if you're the journeyman. So you might say, well, wait a minute, isn't that 18 different actions? Well, yeah, but remember, the push and the pull sort of are two sides of the same coin. So you'll see that the pushes and the pulls really are pretty much 6 different actions, not 12 different actions. But I'm going to start by talking about the trading action. And I'm going to ignore the Farmers Guild because, well, I've already talked about the trade action at the Farmers Guild. It works differently from every other guild. When you do a trade at the farm, you basically pick one of your farms, you cash in all your goods, like I talked about before, and you get 1 shilling or 1 food for every 2 of the goods that you cashed in. The Farmers Guild can never hold more than 10 goods at once, and it starts off with 10 goods. So if Pink was going to trade at the Farmers Guild, then he would move all 4 of these goods into the Farmers Guild. Because he's moving 4 goods, he would take either 2 shillings, 2 food, or 1 of each. And then, because there are more than 10 goods at the Farmers Guild, you have to, first of all, decide what are you going to do with the excess. Well, the first thing you decide is if there are any blessed chickens in the farmyard, chickens that are blessed with rosary beads, you add up the values of the rosary beads and you spill over excess goods into the Merchant Guild. And then to the extent you can't spill over into the Merchant Guild, you spill over into the Alchemist Guild until you've used up all the values of the rosary beads in the farmyard. And then and only then do you then randomly take the excess goods and return them to the haversack. So in this example, if I did have Pink trade here, Pink already took its 2 shillings or 2 food or 1 of each. I've got 14 goods in the farmyard. Because I've got a rosary bead on one of the chickens of value 2, I'm going to first try to spill over 2 goods into the merchant. And to the extent I can't, I'm going to spill over any more into the alchemist. Well, it's not going to be a problem to spill 2 goods into the merchant, because at the beginning of the game, there are 2 empty spots on the merchant. There's you can see that there are rows here for saltpeter and sulfur and iron and wood and food, but intentionally, at the beginning of the game, you leave 1 spot open on the right side of the saltpeter row and on the right side of the sulfur row. So there's room to spill over 2 goods into the merchant right from the beginning of the game. And because I only have a rosary bead worth 2, I'm going to be able to spill over 1 of the saltpeters that are in the farmyard into the Merchant Guild, and I'm going to spill over 1 of the sulfur that's in the farmyard into the Merchant Guild as well, and that's going to take care of the needs of the rosary beads that are on the chicken, because I only have 1 rosary bead and it's value 2, so I'm only spilling over 2 goods. But if I had more rosary beads that said you got to spill over more than 2 goods, I've got to move into the alchemist to spill them over. Or if I didn't happen to have any saltpeter or any sulfur in the farmyard to spill over into the Merchant Guild, then I would have to use these rosary beads to spill other goods possibly into the Alchemist Guild. So one way or another, you have to first try to spill over the value of the rosary beads into empty spaces in the Merchant Guilds, and to the extent you can't do that, you continue to try to do it into the Alchemist Guild. So let's say that I didn't have any saltpeter in the just by random luck. There wasn't any saltpeter in the farmyard, and there was no saltpeter in the harvest that was being cashed in by the player doing the trade action. So if there wasn't any saltpeter in the farmyard, then I still have to spill over 2 goods. I would spill over 1 sulfur into the merchant guild. I can't spill over any saltpeter. There is no saltpeter. So then I still have 1 more good I have to try to spill over. I would look in the Alchemist Guild and say, can I spill something else over? Oh yeah, I could spill over a food, because the Alchemist Guild starts off with 2 empty food spaces and starts off with 2 empty sulfur spaces as well. Anyhow, so once you've finished trying to spill over into the Merchant Guild and trying to spill over into the Alchemist Guild to make up for the rosary beads that are in the farmyard, then you decide, okay, how many excess goods do I have over and above 10? Well, in this example, after spilling over 2 goods into the Merchant Guild, I would have 12 goods left over, because I have 10 now, 4 coming from the harvest. That's 14. 2 spill over into the Merchant, that's 12. Now I've got to get rid of those 2 excess goods, because the maximum in the farmyard is 10. You can see there's a little indicator there that says no more than 10 goods in the barnyard. So I would basically shuffle all the goods up, draw 2 at random from my hand, and those 2 would go back to the haversack, and the other 10 would go back into the Farmers Guild. Simple as that. So that's how the trading action works at the Farmers Guild. You're basically trading goods from one of your farms for shillings or food, and then you've got this little spillover happening, and possibly goods are returning to the haversack. But the trade action in all the other guilds pretty much works differently from that. They all work pretty much the same. So the other 5 trade actions are kind of similar to one another. If you're trading in the Merchant Guild, and I should say everybody has the ability to trade in the to trade in any one of the guilds. You don't have to be the guild master or the journeyman or the apprentice. You can go to any guild and trade there, because they are happy to accept your goods or your shillings. And the trade action is always shown at the bottom of the guild image of the guild. So here you can see at the bottom of the Farmers Guild, you take, for every 2 goods you cash in, you get a food or a shilling at a 2-for-1 ratio. At the Merchants Guild, however, you can purchase up to 3 goods from the merchant, up to 3 goods, paying in shillings the cost of the goods. The cost is shown on the underneath the good. In my program, it's shown by the number that's imprinted on top of the good. So whose turn is it? It's Pink's turn. If Pink wanted to come along here and trade at the Merchant Guild, it could buy a saltpeter for 2, it could buy a sulfur for 2 shillings, and it could pay 1 shilling for a wood. And so spend a total of 5 shillings to buy a maximum of 3 goods. Obviously, you want to try to buy goods from right to left, so because they're always going to be cheaper on the right, more expensive on the left. But as fewer and fewer goods, as more and more goods get removed from the Merchants Guild, the price rises because of demand. So maximum purchase of 3 goods, you pay the shillings, and I'll talk about how you pay the shillings in a moment. I'm first going to talk about the trade action all the way around the board. So at the merchant, you're buying up to 3 goods. You could buy 1 good, you could buy 2 goods, you could buy 3 goods at most, and you're paying shillings. In the Alchemist, you're buying one of the vessels that's on sale. So if the Alchemist, for one reason or another, didn't have any vessels for sale, at which point ferryboat routes would be open, then you can see there's the little image of the ferryboat underneath there. If there were no vessels for sale at the Alchemist, then you wouldn't obviously trade there, because you wouldn't be able to buy anything there. The only reason you would trade at the Alchemist Guild is to buy a vessel. You pay 3 shillings to buy 1 vessel that's up for sale. So you can come over here and buy either a flying machine for 3 shillings or a ship for 3 shillings. You could come over to the Night Guild, pay 3 shillings, and buy your row of influence markers. You could get as little as 1 influence marker for paying 3 shillings, or if you time it right, you'll get 6 influence markers at most, because the most you could have in any one row is 6 influence markers. And if I didn't already make note of the fact, in the Night Guild, when you're initiating it, you not only put out 2 influence markers for the players, but you ensure that if you have fewer than 4 players playing in the game, that you have dummy colors, because you always want to have 4 sets of colors in the Night Guild. You could come over to the Noble Guild and either pay 3 shillings or 6 shillings to buy 1 or 2 King Seal. Once you buy the King Seal, you can kind of peek underneath and see what it's worth, but it's still a King Seal, and it sits with the red King Seal side up in your supply if you're buying it as a King Seal. You either pay 3 for 1 or you pay 6 for 2. And then lastly, if you decide to trade at the Monk Guild, you pay 3 shillings to take at random either the highest valued rosary bead or the lowest valued rosary bead. And effectively what happens is that one of your opponents takes the highest valued rosary bead, in this case 4, and takes the lowest valued rosary bead, in this case 2, shuffles them up, puts 1 in each hand, and then you choose 1 hand. And you're either paying 3 shillings to get the 2, or you're paying 3 shillings to get the 4. But at that point, you don't get to change your mind. You're either getting a 2 or you're getting a 4. So you know you got a 50-50 shot at getting 1 good rosary bead or 1 not so good rosary bead. But in any case, you're paying 3 shillings. You're paying 3 shillings here, you're paying 3 shillings here, you're paying 3 shillings over here in the Alchemist Guild. The number of shillings you're paying over here varies depending upon the number of guilds of goods that you're buying in the Merchant Guild. And the number of shillings you're paying over here varies based on whether you're buying 1 King Seal or 2 King Seals, paying 3 shillings or 6 shillings. So when you pay the shillings, the first shilling goes to the guild master of the guild. If there is no guild master, it goes to the bank. The next shilling you pay goes to the journeyman. If there is no journeyman, it goes to the bank. The next shilling you pay goes either to the farmer's purse or the church's coffer, whatever happens to be on the opposite side of the board of the guild in which you're trading. So if you're buying goods from the Merchant Guild and you spent 7 shillings, for example, you would pay 1 shilling to the guild master, in this case Red, and if Red was trading at the guild, Red's effectively paying herself, so she's sort of getting a refund. But you can't take that into account when you're just determining and calculating how many shillings you're paying up front. So if it was Red that was trading at the Merchants Guild and Red wanted to buy 7 shillings worth of goods, she can't take into the fact that she is going to get some of those shillings back. She has to have the 7 shillings available and then be happy about the fact that she's going to get a little bit of a refund. Trading at the Merchants Guild, the first shilling gets paid to Red as the guild master. The second shilling gets paid to the journeyman. There is no journeyman at the guild, so it goes back to the bank. In the case of the Merchant Guild, the third shilling goes into the church coffer. And now we still have 4 shillings, because in the example I just gave, we've got 7 shillings that have to get unloaded, so we go right back around again. The 4th shilling goes to the guild master. The 5th shilling goes to the journeyman. There is no journeyman, so it goes into the bank. The 6th shilling goes to the church coffer, so now the church coffer has 2 shillings in it. And now you've got to go to the 7th shilling, and it goes to the guild master again. So if Red was trading here and bought 7 shillings worth of goods, she would know full well that she was going to get a rebate or a refund of 3 of those shillings because she's the guild master there. So now that I've talked about the trade version of the guild action ad nauseum, let's actually see it in action. So I'm going to have Pink perform the guild action. And as you can see, Pink can trade with any one of the 6 guilds. And Pink also has the option to push from the Alchemist Guild and the Monk Guild because he is the guild master at those 2 guilds. I'll be talking more about push and pull a little bit later. So I'm going to have Pink go to the Alchemist Guild, perform a trade action, And all he has to do is say which vessel he wants to buy. He's going to buy a ship. So I'm going to select ship. He pays 3 shillings. He had 7. 1 shilling he paid to himself because he's the guild master. 1 shilling went to the bank. 1 shilling came over here to the church coffer. All right. So now it's Red's turn. I'll have Red also perform a guild action. I'm going to have Red trade at the Nobles Guild. Now, you remember, if you recall, you go to the Nobles Guild if you want to buy a couple, 1 or 2 king seals. So we'll have Red go to the Nobles Guild. I'll have her select this one for 3 shillings. 1 goes to her. I'm sorry, 1 goes to the bank. The second one goes to the bank. The third one comes to the farmer's purse. There is no guild master or journeyman at the Nobles Guild. We'll stop right there. Now we're back to Pink, and now that Pink has a vessel he can use, he's going to use that vessel to move his monk, his drunken monk, over here to this little island so he can pick up a saltpeter, because he's hurting for saltpeter at this point. And he doesn't want us cheating anymore to get him any more saltpeter. So we're going to have Pink perform the move action. It is a free action for him to bring his ship. Let's get that ship. There we go. Up here. So I'll just stick it right there underneath the monk pond. Drag it down a little bit so you can see it more easily. And now that the monk has a ship to sail on, the monk could very easily just sail over here, and he's made it. Now, Pink does have 1 more movement point available to him, but I'm going to leave Pink right here. So at this point, I'm just going to have Pink pilfer this saltpeter and end his move action. All right. Back to Red. Red's going to perform the tax action. Now, you can't perform the tax action unless you rule a town. And Red does rule a town right here. She is the ruler of this town. In fact, there's no subject, no serf. She's the only one there. So she is going to select the tax action. When you select the tax action, you get 2 shillings as income. And then you get 1 additional shilling for every additional town and feudum that you rule on the board. Now, Red does not rule any additional towns or feudums, so she's only going to get 2 shillings out of this. But there's one other special ability of the tax action, and that's down here in the corner. If you have a knight on the board, and Red does, she has a knight right here. He's a little inebriated, but he is a knight nevertheless. So if you have a knight on the board, you got a free influence marker for your trouble. So Red's going to come out of this with 2 shillings and an influence marker. And it's just as simple as that. So she selects the tax action. She gets her 2 shillings. She gets her influence marker. And now we're back to Pink. So let's take a look at what Pink's possible actions are here. Pink can do an influence action. You've all seen how that works. That's not too complicated. He can perform an explore action. Explore action is one where you get some royal writs into your hand. Royal writs, as we'll see, can be a combination of different things. They might be cards you could play immediately or at any time during the game, provide you with some weapons or some special extra resources. They might be endgame scoring goals you're going to aim for, but you can't use those unless you attach or assign a king seal to them. And they might also be, and I should say this only applies, I think, if you have the Kickstarter version, they might also include special actions you can play in addition to your normal 11 action cards. I'm not going to talk probably any more about those because they only apply to the Kickstarter version of our audience, and it's simple enough for them to figure out how those work. Anyway, Pink cannot perform an explore action at this point because where are we? Pink. He does not rule any outposts. Pink, in fact, is over here. He's a serf at this farm. He rules a farm of his own up here, where he harvested earlier, but that's it. So we can't use the explore action until Pink performs the influence action, for example, over here at this outpost, so that he can rule that outpost, and then he can perform the explore action. The conquer action he's thinking about using to attack Red's pawn at this location. He could do that now, but could he do it later? Well, remember, if we can't use the explore now, so if we wanted to use the explore, we'd have to do influence first to get the outpost. Once we rule the outpost, we could perform the explore action, but then we'd be performing our last action with the conquer action, and you can't do that. There's a special icon here in the corner of the conquer action that says this cannot be the last card you play in a round. If it is the last card you play in a round, you basically forfeit the entire action. You play the card, but you just don't get anything out of it. So really, Pink's only valid choice right now is to delay the influence in the explore and get the conquer action out of the way first. Then he'll come back and perform the influence and the explore. So he's going to do conquer, then influence, and then explore. It's the only way he's going to get the benefit of all three of his actions. So he's going to perform the conquer, and there are three options when you perform the conquer action. You can either attack an opponent's pawn or monster, if you happen to have presumably a pawn there as well. So Pink can attack Red's knight here if he wanted to. Alternatively, you can attack an opponent's feudum. That's a bigger deal because feudums are much bit more than just one pawn. So to conquer a feudum, you're just going to have to need a little more firepower. But it works pretty much the same way. Alternatively, if you have the third option for the conquer action, and let me bring the card up here. The other action is that if you have a noble present at a location, you can immediately kick off an opponent's serf or subject. So in this case, the example it's showing here is that the player using the noble is the ruler of this location, and he's kicking off the opposing serf. But you could use this action just as easily if black, in this little example, was also the ruler and this was his subject, and you can knock his subject off. It's automatic. There's no attack involved per se, because when you're attacking a pawn, or a feudum, you have to add up your attack value and the opponent's defense value and sort of figure out if you succeeded or not. But with this special version of the conquer action, and this happens to be called Starve the People, you automatically conquer the opponent's serf or subject, knock him off the board. You don't score any points for it, but it does give you an easy way to get onto the military service track. And if I haven't already said again, you need to be on the military service track in order to avoid losing points if you have a feudum on the board. Nobody has a feudum on the board yet, so it's not something to be concerned about. But if Pink had, let's say, designs to get a feudum on the board, he'd need to make some moves, either now or later, to get onto the military service track. So there's no problem to get onto the track early, even if you don't have a feudum on the board yet. You could just be sort of preparing for it. Now, Pink does not have a noble on the board, so this really isn't an option. And honestly, there is no red serf or subject anywhere on the board either, so we really can't, there's no way this action can even be used. I suppose if red did have a noble here, red could use a conquer action to kick off pink serf. And that, I'm not sure what he would gain by that other than really automatically getting onto the military service track if he wanted to. Now, there is a way for the opponent to nullify or protect himself from this special Starve the People action. If he has a defense card in his hand, he can immediately play it. If he plays his defense card and pays 1 food, he nullifies this action altogether, so basically his opponent wasted his turn. And the defender also gets a free king seal that he can place underneath his influence marker in order to guarantee that his opponent can never pull that stunt again. It basically grants that particular influence marker royal immunity and protection going forward. Now, of course, that doesn't help his other influence markers on the board, so it's possible that somebody else or his only opponent could try to conquer those, but at least this one influence marker is protected. Now, any time the defender or the person who has this royal immunity, if he feels he desperately needs a king seal, he can just grab that one off the board for free, the one that was granting his serf or subject royal immunity. He can grab that for free and use it for other purposes. Of course, he's giving up royal immunity at that point. All right, so I've talked enough about that. Let's actually just see a typical attack and see how that works. So pink is going to just attack red's pawn. That's the only option here. So I'm going to select the pawn as the target of the attack. Now red, if you recall, does have a defend card that she chose as part of her initial selection of cards. So she can immediately reveal that to get +1 defense and 1 victory point. So she's going to do that. She gets a victory point for her trouble, and she gets a 1 defense value for that defense card. Now, what are the other attack and defend values that come into play here when you're attacking, when a pawn is being attacked? Well, the attacker gets +1 attack for each and every one of his pawns there. So pink only has 1 pawn here, so he's going to get +1 attack. The defender gets +2 defense for each and every one of his pawns present, or in this case red, her pawns present. Unfortunately, this pawn is inebriated thanks to the wine. So when you're dealing with a pawn that's inebriated, or is under the spell of wine, if you will, they don't get any defense or attack value for that matter. So frankly, if pink also was being fed with wine right now, he would not even have this +1 attack value. As it stands, pink has +1 attack for his sober pawn, and red has no defense for this inebriated pawn. In addition, let's take a look at the defender. In addition, the defender would get +1 for any monsters that he has under his control that are present at this location. So the monster would chip in and offer some additional defense. Again, +1 for that monster. So if red did have a monster here, her total defense would be 2 instead of 1. If she was fortunate enough to have 2 monsters under her control, and they were both here because she was worried about this particular location succumbing to an attack, then she would have 2 defense from the monsters and 1 from her defend action, giving her a total of 3 defense. As it stands, she doesn't have much going here. The attacker, on the other hand, as I said, gets +1 for every one of his sober pawns. He can pay 1 saltpeter if he has any to give him +1 attack. And if there's a knight involved in the battle on the attacker's side, he can pay any number of saltpeter to get +1 attack for each. Unfortunately, pink does not have a knight. Red has a knight, but that doesn't help pink. Pink does not have a knight as part of the attack, so he can only do this action once to get +1 attack for paying saltpeter. Truth is, he only has 1 saltpeter, so it really is besides the point. If pink did have a monster that was under his control at this location, he'd get +1 for that monster. And if he had any weapons cards, any royal writs that he had collected earlier that were weapons, he could use those to give him some additional attack value in this battle. Now, when there's a tie, it goes to the defender. So as it stands right now, pink's basically going to lose this battle. Now, when you lose a battle, nothing really happens. So all he would have done would have been to waste a turn. But he does have a saltpeter that he can pay, the one he collected up here. So he's going to pay the saltpeter. That will give him +1 attack. That's all he needs to win this attack. Now he's got a total attack value of 2 against his opponent's defense value of 1. He wins the attack. So what do you get? What do you get out of when you win an attack? Well, in this case, when you're attacking a pawn, the defender's pawn leaves the board. So this knight is going to go back to red, and red is no longer going to have any membership in the Knights Guild. She has 2 status stars, one from this knight pawn, and one because she rules this farm. But the fact that she rules the farm isn't going to matter anymore if the knight pawn is not on the board. So she'll be out of the Knights Guild altogether in a moment. And pink will earn 2 victory points for successfully conquering the pawn. And pink will have the option to put one of his markers onto the military service track to avoid losing points down the road if and when he has a feudum on the board. Now, I will say that when you're conquering a feudum, other things come into play. There might be a defender's subject at the location, and that would give the defender a +1 defense. There might be a serf at the location. In this case, there is. So if this was a feudum and pink was attacking, pink would also get some attack, a +1 attack from this rebelling serf, if you would. So other things come into play when you're attacking a feudum. And feudums themselves offer a defense of +3, so it is a much bigger deal to try to conquer a feudum. But presumably, if you have a knight involved in the attack and you have some extra saltpeter, you pretty much could figure you can pull it off. Attacking is a fairly straightforward operation here. You're not going to go in and perform an attack or even plan to perform an attack unless you think you have a pretty good chance of winning it. Otherwise, why bother? There's no real luck involved. The defender can't play any cards, so you know exactly what you're going to be up against. You know what weapons cards you might have in hand. So unless the defender moves an extra pawn into the location to offer an additional +2 defense, you pretty much can calculate what your chances of winning the attack are. If you do attack a feudum, you get 4 victory points. And other than that, again, everything goes off the board in that case. The feudum is downgraded to an outpost. Any of the defender's pawns or influence markers get returned to the defender. If you did have a serf there, the serf can take over rule of the location. I should also point out that if you're playing a 3 or 4 player game, if there are other players who are at this location, they are ignored. They are not part of the battle. It's literally between you and the player you're targeting. They're just a spectator. All right, so in this case, pink is attacking red's pawn. Pink has +1 attack against red's +1 defense. So pink does win the attack. So the red pawn is going to go away. Red's going to lose her Guildmaster membership. and pink is going to earn 2 victory points and the option to place a marker or a disc on the military service track. So here we go. He gets his 2 points. Red's no longer a member of the Knights Guild. And does pink want to get on the military service track? He's thinking that, yeah, I think I am going to maybe get some feudums on the board down the road. Now, it doesn't matter how many feudums he gets on the board. As long as he has 1 feudum on the board, he owes the king military service. So at the dawn of Epoch 2, at the dawn of Epoch 4, and at the dawn of Epoch 5, you determine how many of these spaces are not covered by markers and see if the player is going to lose any points. So let's have pink put a marker on the board, on the military service track. Now he's got 3 markers, 3 discs available to him. He is going to just play his blank one. The Reeves can be used for special functions, or they can be flipped over and just treated as a blank disc as well. Now, if pink wanted to wholeheartedly commit to the military service track, he'd have to plan on using all 3 of his discs at some point to get on these 3 spaces to completely prevent him from losing points. So he can't think about using his player discs for any other purpose. But if he thinks that one of his player discs might give him more than what he might lose by not covering, say, this 3rd space, he might say maybe make up the 5 points he would lose by not covering this space, and perhaps get even more points if you use that disc for some other operation. So those are the kinds of things, the calculations you have to juggle to determine whether or not you want, how you want to use this finite resource you have available to yourself, these 3 player discs, because that's all you're ever going to get. So pink is going to go onto the military service track. He puts one of his player discs, his blank one in this case, on the 1st space. If he has a feudum by the time the dawn of Epoch 2 comes around, he will not lose 3 points. By the time the dawn of Epoch 4 comes around, if he has not covered this space, he will lose 4 points at that point. And if he still hasn't covered this by the end of the game, the dawn of Epoch 5, at that time, he will lose another 4 points because this space isn't covered, and he'll lose another 5 points at that point because this space isn't covered. So this is all cumulative. So if this is all that pink does as far as covering spaces in the military service track, if he does get a feudum on the board, he'll lose a total of 4, 4, and 5 points. 13 points he's going to lose by not planning to cover these spaces. So if you are going to get involved with feudums, and they are very powerful, they offer, remember, 3 status stars for whatever guild they're associated with. So they make it very difficult for another player to overtake your hold on a particular guild. And they give you 3 points at the end of the game. They give you 3 points every time you score an epic. So they are big. They're just great to have, but you got to make sure you have a plan to get discs on the military service track, else you're going to risk possibly losing as much as 22 points. You'd lose 3 if you didn't have anything covering any space. You'd lose 3 points at the dawn of Epoch 2. You'd lose 7 points at the dawn of Epoch 4. That's 10. And then you'd lose 12 points at the dawn of Epoch 5 at the end of the game. 3 plus 4 plus 5. So a total of 22 points. So you gotta definitely know what you're up against if you're going to get involved with feudums. So now it's Red's turn again. He's hurting a little bit here. He's got an improved action available to him, and he has a repeat action. Now we'll get to the repeat action momentarily. For now, maybe Red also wants to get involved with feudums. Maybe that's his plan. Now, he hasn't made any moves yet to get on the military service track. He hasn't gotten a Conquer card into his hand. So he's not making good plans, suffice it to say. But let's see. He does have that King Seal she just bought. So let's have her use that to improve this town into a feudum. So she's going to use her improve action. She is going to improve this town. And when you improve a town, you pay a king's seal, as you probably just saw, and you get to choose which type of feudum you want to put there, because this is going to give you 3 status stars in whatever guild you select. Red decides that she wants to have an alchemist feudum. She wants a little revenge against pink, because if she gets an alchemist feudum here, that will provide her with 3 status stars, and that's going to bump pink with his single status star down to the journeyman position, and red will take over guildmaster of the alchemist guild. So she's going to select to have an alchemist feudum take the place of this town, and so now she's ruling that alchemist feudum. Red gets bumped down, pink gets bumped down to the journeyman position. Red takes over as the guildmaster with 3 status stars against pink's 1 status star. So she feels better about that. Pink, remember what his plans are. He wants to influence here, so he rules an outpost so that he can then later play as explore action. So Pink is going to choose influence. He is going to influence at this outpost. So Pink's other option is to also place an influence marker here, where he's got this alchemist pawn. If he does that, he's going to take over rule of this farm, bump red down to the serf position. Red won't be too unhappy, because it means then that this landscape will now become hers to tend. And these influence markers could potentially go to her down the road if she decides to cash them in. Pink is going to choose to take over rule of this farm, so he is going to place an influence marker here. Now you will notice that this feudum over here is vulnerable because red does not have a subject there. So she might have to seriously consider that if she wants to really protect this feudum, she's got to get some more influence markers down. Well, at least 1 more influence marker down over here to maintain and cement her hold of that feudum. So you're not necessarily seeing the way a person would logically play this game. I'm just showing you examples of different actions, not necessarily in a very smart way. All right, so Pink is going to place an influence marker down. Now this is going to be Pink's next to last influence marker. He's only going to have 1 left after this. He'll take over rule of the farm. And now red drops down into the serf position, but red is now tending this landscape. Red is now going to use her repeat action. So the repeat action allows you to repeat or to use one of the cards you played in that round another time. Now, what has red done so far in this round? She's played an improve action. She's played a tax action. She's played a defend action. Now, you'll notice the defend action has a no way can you repeat this. So that's not even a choice for her. And she's played a guild action. So let's have her perform the repeat. So she plays her repeat card. And now the 3 cards she could potentially repeat are the guild. And you'll notice the guild card has an X2 in the corner saying, sure, it's free to repeat this card. No problem whatsoever. The tax card, however, does not have an X2 in the corner. So if red wants to repeat the tax action, she has to pay a saltpeter. When we go back and look at the repeat card, you'll notice that if you want to play a card a second time that doesn't have that X2 in the corner, you do have to pay a saltpeter in order to do it. Red does have a saltpeter, so it is available to her as a possibility. If you look at the improve action, you also see that that's missing an X2 in the corner. So if she wanted to play that a second time, again, she would have to pay that saltpeter in order to do it. She is only going to use the guild action, however. So that's free for her to repeat. She doesn't have to pay saltpeter to do it. So what are her options? She can trade at the Merchant's Guild, the Alchemist Guild, the Knight's Guild, not the Nobles Guild, but she could trade at the Monk's Guild. So why can't she trade at the Nobles Guild, and why can't she trade at the Farmer's Guild? Well, first of all, she can't trade at the Farmer's Guild because she doesn't have a farm. I mean, she could trade there, but basically it'd be like saying, okay, I'm repeating my guild action to trade at the Farmer's Guild, and guess what? I can't do it. So I just wasted the whole action. So my program doesn't even give you that option. She can't trade at the Nobles Guild because she already did this round. Remember, she bought that King Seal. So if you repeat the guild action, you're not allowed to repeat the guild action using the same guild you did the first time around. You've got to use a different guild. So she could trade either at the Merchant's Guild, the Alchemist Guild, the Knight's Guild, or the Monk's Guild, or she can push at the Merchant's Guild and the Alchemist Guild because she is the guild master at those two guilds. If she were a journeyman somewhere, she'd be able to pull at that location. Now, this would be a good opportunity for me to go into more detail as to how the pushing and pulling operations work. You've already seen how the trade operations work. They're pretty straightforward. You pay some money for the most part, and you get something back for the expense. Pushing and pulling is a little bit different, and it varies depending upon the guilds involved. So let's start with the Farmer's Guild and the Monk's Guild. If you're a guild master here, you're pushing from the Farmer's Guild into the Merchant's Guild. On the other hand, if you're a journeyman in the Merchant's Guild, you're pulling from the Farmer's Guild into the Merchant's Guild. Either way, you're moving goods from this location into this location and potentially scoring points and getting some other benefits out of performing the action. So if you're doing a push from the Farmer's Guild because you're a guild master there and you're pushing into the Merchant's Guild, you're allowed to push as many as 4 goods from here over to here in order to score points. Now, in this particular instance, there's only 2 goods that could possibly be pushed. That is, and let me bring this up so you can see it big. You can only push 2 possible goods here. You could push a saltpeter to fill in this space, and you could push in a sulfur to fill in this space. Otherwise, there's no other goods you could push. Now, is there a saltpeter and a sulfur that's in the Farmer's Guild that you can use to push? There are. There are 2 saltpeters available. There are 2 sulfurs available. So that's not a problem. So if you're pushing from the Farmer's Guild to the Merchant's Guild, you would push 1 saltpeter in this case. You would push 1 sulfur, and you'd only be using 2 of your 4 possible pushes, but that's all you can get out of this, at least until maybe some other players or you buy some more goods from the merchant and free up some more spaces. You score 4, 5, or 6 points, depending upon whether or not you completed or filled 1, 2, or 3 rows or columns. You can't count both rows and columns. You either complete rows or you complete columns, and you see which one you're doing better at. So if in this case if a guild master in the Farmer's Guild was pushing a saltpeter and a sulfur into the Merchant's Guild, he could either look at that as completing 1 column or look at it as completing 2 rows. Obviously, it's better to look at it as completing 2 rows. So he's completed 2 rows. He scores 5 points. He'd also have the option to place one of his Reeves in the Farmer's Guild. Again, he's the guild master there. If he doesn't have a Reeve there right now, in fact, we're thinking about this fictitiously, about somebody who possibly was a guild master here. But if that player did have an available Reeve disc, one of these that has a Reeve symbol on it, he could place the Reeve in the guild and score 1 additional point for the Reeve. Then, anytime he pushed again from the Farmer's Guild, he'd score that 1 point. Again, you can't have another Reeve in the same guild. So you'd just be able to score that 1 point every time you did that push operation wherever you happen to have your Reeve located. Now, if you're able to have 2 Reeves on the board, one in 2 different guilds, because say you're Guildmaster in the Farmers Guild, and maybe you're the Journeyman in the Knights Guild, now you've got 2 Reeves on the board. So if that player is now performing the push action from the Farmers Guild, he's scoring the 4, 5, or 6 points he's getting out of the push, and he's scoring 2 additional points, one for his Reeve here, and one for the Reeve he has elsewhere on the board. Unfortunately, if his 2 Reeves were elsewhere entirely, and he didn't have any Reeves here, then he doesn't get to score points for those Reeves. You have to have a Reeve present in the guild in which you're performing the push or pull operation, and then if you happen to have another Reeve on the board, you do get your points for those extra Reeves. So that's pushing. Now the pull, if you're the Journeyman in the Merchants Guild, you can pull goods from the Farmers Guild in exactly the same way, except you don't get to pull 4 goods the way the Guildmaster did. Remember, pulling is always a weaker operation. So if you're pulling into the Merchants Guild, you only get to pull 3 possible goods. So this is all shown at the top of every guild. But this is showing you the push operation for the Merchants Guild. If you wanted to see the push operation for the Farmers Guild, here it is. You move up to 5 goods to the Merchants Guild and score 4, 5, or 6 points for completing 1, 2, or 3 rows/columns, respectively. You either choose rows or columns, not both. Now, if you're the Journeyman in the Merchants Guild and you're pulling, you can now pull 3 goods from the Farmers Guild into this guild. You score a flat 3 points no matter how many goods you pulled, and you get to draw 2 Royal Writ cards and keep 1. The other one goes back to the bottom of the deck. Again, when we come back to pink to perform that explore action, that's when we'll take a closer look at Royal Writs. You're going to notice that the rewards for pushing and pulling are going to be pretty much the same. You're always as a pusher, as a Guildmaster who's doing a push, you're always going to score 4, 5, or 6 points, usually for doing something 1, 2, or 3 times. And if you're a Journeyman in a guild and you're pulling from the adjacent guild, then you're always going to score a flat 3 points if you're successful, and you always, as a reward, you do get to draw 2 Royal Writs, keep 1, return the other to the bottom of the deck. So that's all I'm going to say about the rewards, because the rewards are going to be the same. It's just the pushing and the pulling that's going to vary. So in summary, if you're a Guildmaster in the Farmers Guild, you can push a saltpeter and a sulfur into the Merchants Guild and score 5 points. And I've already talked about the Reeves. If you're pulling from the Merchants Guild, if you're pulling from the Farmers Guild into the Merchants Guild, because you're the Journeymaster in the Merchants Guild, then you could pull 1, 2, or 3 goods, and as long as you complete 1 row or column, you score 3 points and take 1 Royal Writ, draw 2 Royal Writs, keep 1, put the other one back on the bottom of the deck. Okay, so that's pushing and pulling involving these 2 guilds. So now let's take a look at pushing and pulling between these 2 guilds. Say you're the Guildmaster of the Merchants Guild pushing into the Alchemist Guild. It's going to pretty much work the same way. How many carts can you fill in the Alchemist Guild by pushing goods from the Merchants Guild? Now, when you're pushing from the Merchants Guild, we've already looked at that, you're allowed to push 4 goods from the Merchants Guild into the Alchemist Guild and try to fill 3 carts, with 1, 2, or 3 carts. So what could a Guildmaster like Red, who's the Guildmaster of the Merchants Guild here, what could she possibly do if she was going to do a push? Well, she could push 2 of these green food from the Merchant's Guild here to fill these 2 spaces. She could push up to 2 of these sulfur to fill these 2 spaces. Remember, she can only push, what was the total again? I think it was 4, wasn't it? Yeah, so she could push all 4 of those goods into the Alchemist Guild, 2 food and 2 sulfur, because the 2 food are here. She would push from the right-hand side, so she'd push these 2 food, and she'd push these 2 sulfur. She would complete two carts. She would complete the food cart, and she would have completed the sulfur cart, so she'd score 5 points. If you're the journeyman in the Alchemist Guild pulling, then you can only pull 2 goods from the Merchant's Guild and try to fill one cart. So if you're the journeyman in the Alchemist Guild, you're probably pulling 2 of the green food that are available in the Merchant's Guild to fill this cart, or you're pulling 2 of the sulfur that are in this Merchant's Guild to fill this cart, and then you score your reward, your 3 points, and you're drawing 2 royal writs, keeping 1, returning the other. Let's take a look at pushing and pulling between these 2 guilds. If you're the guild master of the Alchemist Guild, you can try to manufacture 3 items. Now, what can you manufacture? Well, they're all showing here in the Alchemist Guild, so let's bring the guild back. You can manufacture a ship. It costs 2 wood and a food, so you would take 2 wood out of the Alchemist Guild and 1 food, return it to the haversack, and then you would take a ship from the supply. If there was a ship, there would have to be a ship in the supply. In this case, there are 2 ships in the supply. So one of those ships would then come into the Alchemist Guild, and now there'd be a flying machine and a ship. If there weren't any vessels in the Alchemist Guild, and you just manufactured a new one, then you would have closed down ferryboat routes. So if you were planning to use the ferryboat, you wouldn't be able to. So again, you've got to take all these things into consideration. So that's one of the things you can manufacture. Now, of course, you could also manufacture a sub. That costs 2 iron and 1 food. So you could remove these 2 iron and this 1 food and manufacture a sub. You could manufacture a flying machine. It costs 1 of each, 1 wood, 1 iron, and 1 food. Now you'll notice, because there's only 1 food in the Alchemist Guild, you can't manufacture 2 of these vessels. Best you can do is manufacture 1 ship or 1 sub or 1 flying machine, because you're just limited by the fact that there's only 1 food in this guild. But there are other things you can manufacture. You can manufacture a barrel of crud. The first barrel of crud you manufacture costs 2 saltpeter and 1 sulfur. If you wanted to try to manufacture 2 barrels of crud, the first one would cost 2 saltpeter and a sulfur, but there's some savings, so the second one only costs 1 saltpeter and 1 sulfur, for a total of 3 saltpeter and 2 sulfur. Now, in this example, you wouldn't be able to manufacture 2 barrels of crud, because there isn't a sulfur available in this guild. Crud, by the way, is just the old medieval term for gunpowder. And if there wasn't enough sulfur, and you could potentially try to manufacture 3 barrels of crud, that would cost 2 saltpeter and a sulfur for the first one, 1 saltpeter, 1 sulfur for the second one. Of course, there would have to be more sulfur here, and 1 wood for the third barrel. So the best that the pusher, the guild master of the alchemist, could manufacture here is 1 vessel and 1 barrel of crud, because there's enough to make a vessel, and there's enough to make 1 barrel of crud. Now, we've already seen that when you manufacture a vessel, you're adding a vessel to the alchemist guild. When you're manufacturing a barrel of crud, you're adding influence markers to the Knights Guild. How many influence markers are you adding? Well, you're adding a number of influence markers to every row, depending upon how many influence markers are already in that row. Effectively, if the row is empty, the first barrel of crud puts one influence marker in this spot. However, if there already was one influence marker here, then the best you could do with that next barrel is to fill these two spots. Now, in this example, if we were playing, say, a 5-player game, so this row was active, then if you were able to manufacture 2 barrels of crud, in this row, you would only place one influence marker, because all you can do is try to fill whatever section is currently open. This first section, which is just this first column, is full in this row because there's a pink marker there, a pink influence marker. This section, which involves these 2 columns, notice this goes with these 2, is half full, so all you can do is fill this section in this row. So you would place one new influence marker here. You would then do the same thing here, because again, there's 2 markers, so you'd put one here, same thing here, same thing here, and if it was a 5-player game, you'd only put one in the first column because that would fill that section. The next barrel of crud, now with these 3 columns full, let's say if now there was a pink and a pink and a pink, the next barrel of crud would fill up this section. The next section are these 3 columns. So the next section, if you manufactured a barrel of crud, would bring in another 3 influence markers. A simpler way to think about it is that for every row, if there are no influence markers in the row, you add 1 to fill in the first column. If there's 1 influence marker in that row, you add 2 to fill in the next group. If there are 2 influence markers in that column, you add 1 to fill in the second section. If there are 3, 4, or 5 influence markers in the row, then you just add enough influence markers to fill up the entire row. In summary, if I manufactured a barrel of crud, what would happen in this 2-player game? We would add 1 pink influence marker, 1 red influence marker, 1 blue influence marker, and 1 yellow influence marker. If I were able to manufacture 2 barrels of crud, again, I'd have to have more sulfur in the Alchemist Guild to do it, but if I were able to manufacture 2 barrels of crud, I would basically fill the row for each one of the 4 players in this game, for the 4 colors that are in this game. Then I wouldn't be able to manufacture a 3rd barrel of crud because I couldn't add any more influence markers. So even if I did have the goods available in the Alchemist Guild, I wouldn't be able to manufacture that 3rd barrel of crud. The only way you could possibly manufacture 3 barrels of crud is if at least one of the rows that you're playing with in the Knights Guild is empty, because then that first barrel fills the first space, the next barrel fills the next 2 spaces, and the next barrel fills the last 3 spaces. When you're pushing from the Alchemist Guild, as I said, you can manufacture up to 3 items, and you score 4, 5, or 6 for manufacturing 1, 2, or 3 items. If you're doing a pull from the Alchemist Guild into the Knights Guild, because you're the journeyman in the Knights Guild, then you can only manufacture 1 item. And if you're pushing from the Knights Guild to the Nobles Guild, you're trying to fill rows and columns in the Nobles Guild by adding more King Seals. You could try to add as many as 3 King Seals into the Nobles Guild. Unfortunately, and fortunately, right now we could potentially add 3 King Seals to the Nobles Guild because there are 3 empty spaces. But if there were only 2 empty spaces, the best you could do would add 2 King Seals. So the Guild Master in the Knights Guild, doing a push into the Nobles Guild, is trying to fill complete rows or columns in the Nobles Guild by returning 1, 2, or 3 different colored influence markers from the Knights Guild and adding king seals to the Nobles Guild. Now in this example, we could potentially, if you're the Guildmaster, we could do it 3 times because there are 3 spaces to be filled here. So if that were the case, you can return up to 3 different colored influence markers. Well, if I were red and I was the Guildmaster in the Knights Guild, I'm certainly not returning a red influence marker. I would return a pink one, a blue one, and a yellow one, leaving only 1 in each of those 3 rows. And then I would have added a king seal here, a king seal here, and a king seal here from the supply, and I would have filled 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, even though this row only consists of this 1 space. Now, I could also have looked at it as completing 2 columns, but it's better to complete 3 rows if it's worth 6 points, as opposed to 5 points. If you're doing a pull from the Nobles Guild, from the Knights Guild into the Nobles Guild, all you could do are remove up to 2 influence markers and try to complete 1 row or column to score your 3 points and get a royal writ. Okay, pushing and pulling between the Nobles Guild and the Merchants Guild. If you're pushing out of the Nobles Guild, you can take up to 2 king seals out of the Nobles Guild and flip them over and turn them into rosary beads if there are available spaces on the necklace in the Monks Guild. And then if the sum of the rosary beads in the Monks Guild exceeds 17 or more, you'd score your 6 points. If it equaled or exceeded 11, you'd score 5 points. If it equaled or exceeded 5 or more, you would score 4 points. What's already in this guild, there's 4 plus 3 plus 3 plus 2 for a total of 12. So you're easily going to get 5. The question is, are you going to be able to take off 2 king seals out of this guild, out of the Nobles Guild, and hope they add up to 5? You just don't know. If you happen to reveal 2 2s, you're not going to make it. But if at least one of them is a 2 and one of them is a 3, you're going to be okay. You will have added a total of 5, and then you'd have 5 plus 4 is 9, plus 3 is 12, plus 3 is 15, plus 2 is 17. You'd score your 6 points. Again, not counting Reeves. If you were placing Reeves, or if you had a Reeve in the Nobles Guild. If you're pulling from the Nobles Guild into the Monks Guild because you're the journeyman in the Monks Guild, then all you could do is take 1 king seal out of the Nobles Guild, flip it, put it into a free space in the Monks Guild, and if you equal or exceed 11, which you would in this case because you already equal or exceed 11 without even having to add another bead, then you'd score your 3 points and get your royal writ. Finally, let's talk about the push and the pull between the Monks Guild and the Farmers Guild. In this particular case, it's real simple. You take the highest and lowest beads out of the Monks Guild. So you would take a 2 and a 4 out of the Monks Guild, give it to one of your opponents. They would mix them up, put 1 in each hand. You would pick a hand, and you're either moving the highest one or the lowest one into the Farmers Guild. And if you're the Guildmaster of the Monks Guild doing this, if, where are we? Where's our push operation? Right here. Then if the sum of the beads that are on the chickens is equals or exceeds 3 or 6 or 9 points, you'd score 4, 5, or 6 points. On the other hand, if you're pulling from the Monks Guild into the Farmers Guild, you do the same thing. 1 bead comes over, but then as long as you equal or exceed 5 bead values amongst all the chickens, then that's the only way you'd score your 3 points. If you didn't, then you'd be doing the operation, but you wouldn't score your points, and you wouldn't get your royal writ either. So you probably wouldn't, if you were in the Farmers Guild right now as a journeyman, you may not want to do this pull, because you basically have a 50-50 chance of meeting this goal of 5, because basically you're picking a 2 or you're picking a 4. You win if you pick the 4, you'll lose if you pick the 2. So I'm not sure those are good odds to waste a turn on that particular operation. If you're the guild master in the Monks Guild pushing into the Farmers Guild, or if you're the guild master in the Farmers Guild pushing into the Merchants Guild, you split either the church coffer, if you're the guild master here, or you split the farmer's purse, if you're the guild master over here in the Farmers Guild. You take half of what's there, you give the other half to the journeyman of that particular guild. So if you're the guild master here, you take half, you give half to the journeyman. If there is no journeyman, then the journeyman's half stays in the coffer or stays in the purse. As the guild master, you get any odd amount. So in this instance, if you're pushing from the Monks Guild to the Farmers Guild, and you're taking either the high or low bead and adding it to the chickens and seeing what you add up to, you also, regardless, get to split the single shilling, in this case, that happens to be in the Monks Guild. Well, that's an odd amount, so you basically keep it, leaving nothing for the journeyman. But if there were 3 shillings in the church coffer, you would take 2, and if there was a journeyman, he or she would take 1. If there were no journeyman, the 1 shilling would stay in the church coffer. And that would work the same way if you were the guild master in the Farmers Guild, pushing out of the Farmers Guild into the Merchants Guild. You split the farmer's purse, you keep the odd amount. The last action you could perform when you're doing a guild action is to throw a feast for an opponent. Now, when you're throwing a feast for an opponent, you're effectively taking over their push or pull action. You're doing what they're not doing effectively. And you're basically acting in their stead, doing their push or their pull, scoring their points for doing so, possibly splitting the farmer's purse or the church coffer and taking their half, and you score an additional 3 points over and above what it is you normally score. So if you're, say, pushing out of the Monks Guild, if you were able to score 4 points, in fact, if you were throwing a feast, you'd actually score a total of 7 points and split the church coffer. How do you actually throw a feast? Well, first of all, you have to have a sulfur in your wine barrel. You have to pay a sulfur out of your wine barrel to the haversack. Then you would have to have a pawn present where the opponent's pawn was, or have one of your pawns present at a feudum where that belonged to one of your opponents, so that you could perform their guild operation in their place. Now, for example, if red had a pawn here, then red would be able to pay a sulfur out of her wine barrel and then perform pink's alchemist pull operation, because there's a pink alchemist pawn here. So all red would be able to do if she had a pawn here is perform pink's alchemist pull operation for her. She would score whatever points pink would normally score, plus an additional 3. If pink, on the other hand, was present over here, where this pawn was and where this feudum was, pink would have the choice of paying a sulfur out of his wine barrel, and then he could either perform the push operation of the Merchants Guild, because there's a pawn here showing the merchant's face, or he could perform Red's push operation out of the Alchemist Guild, because he's present at Red's Alchemist Feudum. If Red also happened to be the guild master of some other guild, Pink would not be able to throw a feast if he were here, and be able to use that push or pull operation. You have to use the push or pull operation of one of the pawns that's beside your pawn, or the feudum that's beside your pawn, wherever your pawn happens to be located. Let's actually have Red do her repeat. Remember, she was doing a repeat. She's repeating her guild action, and she is going to do, we said, a push out of the Alchemist Guild. So she selects push. Remember, what she's trying to do are manufacture up to 3 items. But we already determined that the best she can do is manufacture 2 items. She could either make a ship, a flying machine, or a submersible, because there's at least one of those in the supply. There is at least one sub, one ship, and one flying machine. So, for example, let's have her make a flying machine, which costs 1 wood, 1 iron, and 1 food. So once she's made that first flying machine, she can't make a second one because there's not enough food to do it. But she could make a barrel of crud, because all she needs for that is 2 saltpeter and 1 sulfur for the first barrel of crud. So by doing this, she's going to manufacture 1 flying machine. Now maybe she's thinking to herself, oh, you know what, there's already a flying machine there. Maybe I should make a submersible. So instead, I'm going to make a submersible, which costs 2 iron and a food. So she's going to spend 2 of these iron, 1 of these food, 2 of these saltpeter, and 1 of these sulfur, and she's going to end up with a sub in the Alchemist Guild and another influence marker added to every row in the Knights Guild, and she's going to score 5 points and have the option of placing a Reeve in the Alchemist Guild to score an additional point. So let's have her do this. She's making a sub and a barrel of crud. So you're going to see the 2 iron, the food, the 2 saltpeter, and the sulfur go away. You're going to see the sub show up. You're going to see 1 influence marker added to every row. So here we go. There goes the iron. There goes the food. There goes the saltpeter. There goes the sulfur. There go the influence markers. And, oh, when the sub did show up, it just didn't, a little bug there. It didn't show up in the large version of the Alchemist Guild. She did score 5 points for manufacturing 2 items, and now she has the option of placing one of her Reeves in this guild to score an additional point. If she had a Reeve in another guild and added her Reeve to the Alchemist Guild, she would score an additional 2 points. Now, of course, she's thinking to herself, well, wait a minute, I have a Feudum on the board. I think I need to use those Reeve discs in the military service track. So I can't even afford to use them as Reeves to score additional points here. So that would be foolish. So she's gonna. So she would normally say no, but she was already foolish to have her drunken knight knocked off over here in the Farmers Guild, in the farmer location over here. So yeah, she's gonna add her Reeve for 1 more point. So one of her Reeve discs goes in here into her position in the Alchemist Guild. She scores an additional point, and now if she ever does another push operation out of the Alchemist Guild, as long as her Reeve is here, then she would be able to score an additional point for that Reeve. If Pink later knocked her down to the journeyman position, then Red would be able to do a pull operation by pulling from the Merchants Guild into the Alchemist Guild and score an additional point for the Reeve. Her Reeve would actually flip down to be to the journeyman side, if you would, of this particular guild. So it would just shift a little bit onto the other side, to just so that it always is on the same side as your influence marker indicating whether or not you're the guild master or the journeyman. Of course, if you get knocked out of the guild entirely, then you do get your Reeve back, and you get a chance to use it again and play it somewhere else. We're back to Pink. Remember, Pink now wants to perform the Explore action. All the Explore action allows you to do is to draw 2 royal writs plus 1 royal writ for every additional outpost that you rule or every additional feudum that you have on the board. Well, Pink does not have any additional outposts that she rules, and she doesn't have any additional feudums, so she's only going to draw 2 royal writs. She gets to keep 1 and return the other to the bottom of the deck. But then, after that, she gets the option to pay an iron to draw 2 more royal writs, keep 1, return the other to the bottom of the deck. So that's an option you can have available to you if you have some iron that you're willing to spend. So let's have him, I should say, play the Explorer action. He draws a mandate, which is one of those royal writs that's already sealed with a king's seal. So it's one of those that he can play anytime he wants to. And this allows him to pay 1 wood to make a ship or 1 iron to make a sub. Again, assuming there is a ship or a sub in the supply that he can make. The other option is to keep this one. This one is a charter. This one you would take for endgame scoring purposes. You would have to have a king's seal to add to this card to make use of it at the end of the game. But then if you did, if you ruled one of these locations shown here, this happens to be the northern kingdom. So if you ruled one of these, what is it? This one, this one, this one, this one, this one, or this one, you would score 3 points at the end of the game, assuming you had your King's Seal assigned to this card. If you ruled 2 of these locations, you'd score 5. If you ruled 3 of them, you'd score 7. If you ruled 4 or more of them, you would score 9. Well, he does currently rule this one, so he would score at least 3 points from this. So as long as he could plan to also rule some of these, he could possibly do pretty well with this card. He already owns a ship. At least he's making use of it right now by moving this a pawn around the board. Remember, he's going to abandon it if and when he ever decides to move the pawn and take a different route to somewhere else. But maybe right now he decides he's going to keep the charter. So he's going to select the charter and hope that he can get a King's Seal before the end of the game and then score 3, 5, 7, or 9 victory points. Now, remember, he has the option to pay his iron to get another 2 and keep 1. So let's have him do that. He pays an iron. Now he gets one that says, okay, again, this is an endgame scoring. Oh, you have to seal this with a King's Seal, and at some point during the game, you killed a monster, whether it was the behemoth or the sea serpent, you would score 7 points. This card, on the other hand, is a mandate. It's already pre-sealed, so it's a weapon in this case. This means that if you're attacking some other player, you can use this for +1 attack value for free, or you can pay a wood to use this for +2 attack value. I think since Pink already has plans to get onto this military track and get some feudums on the board, he's going to take the weapon because he knows he's going to need to perform a couple of attacks at some point down the road. So he'll take the weapon. So he's now done. Red's done as well. So now I'm going to click continue to do the Nourish Pawn phase. Each player is going to pay 1 food. But I'm going to cheat again because I want to ensure that we end the epic here so I can demonstrate how epic scoring works. And the only way we're going to end the epic is if, when we're done, four Epic 2 region tiles are showing. Now, I know one of them is going to get removed because we're going to roll the progress die at the end of the round and randomly remove one of these Phase 1 tiles. But if I force, I'm going to pretend that one of these was already removed. Because the only way I can force this into the Dawn of Epic scoring is to ensure that we're going to end up with 4 Phase 2 region tiles showing. That's shown here in this little chart at the bottom. So here's the chart that says that if there are 4 Phase 2, if there are 4 Phase 2 tiles showing, it marks the end of Epic 1 and the Dawn of Epic 2. If there are 3 Phase 3 region tiles showing, it marks the end of Epic 2 and moves you into the Dawn of Epic 3. If there's 2 Phase 4 tiles showing, then that ends Epic 4 and moves you, ends Epic 3 and moves you into Epic 4. And then finally, if there's at least 1 empty stack so that 1 Epic 5 imprint on the board is showing, then that will end the game, to trigger the end of the game. You'll score for the end of the epic, and then you'll move immediately into end game scoring. So right now, I am going to go into the Nourish Pawns phase. Each player is going to pay a food. Their sulfur is going to go back to the haversack. There goes red sulfur. 1 more tile gets removed, and now my program automatically does Dawn of Epic scoring. So what happens during the Dawn of Epic scoring? Well, first of all, you score for being either a guild master or a journeyman in each of the guilds. Remember, guild masters score 5 victory points, journeymen score 3 victory points, and if you're playing a 4 or 5 player game, apprentices score 1 point. Well, pink is the journeyman here and the guild master here. So that's 8 points for pink. You can see 3 points for being a journeyman of the Alchemist Guild, 5 points for being the guild master of the Monks Guild. Red, on the other hand, is the guild master of the Merchants Guild and the Alchemist Guild, so red's going to score 10 points for those 2 positions. Then you score for landscapes. Anybody who has a serf tending a landscape, if there's at least 1 good or resource on that landscape, they score 4 points. If the landscape is void of any goods or resources because they already took them when they placed the landscape or they took them the last time around, then they only score 2 points for an empty landscape. Red is the serf over here tending this landscape, which does have archery targets on it, so she scores 4 points for that. Finally, you score for active regions. These are regions in which you are either ruling a location or you have a landscape that you're tending. So pink is ruling this outpost in the sea region. He is ruling this farm in the desert region, and he's ruling this farm in the forest region. So he's active in 3 regions. You score 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, or 11 points for being active in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 regions. So because pink is active in 3 different regions, he scores 5 points at this point. Red only scores 1 victory point for 1 active region because red only is ruling this feudum in the desert region. That's it. She does have a serf tending this landscape, but it's also in the desert region, so it doesn't really help her. So she's only active in 1 region, so she scores 1 point. Finally, you lose points for being disloyal to the king by having a feudum on the board and not having a space on the military track covered. Remember, that only happens at the Dawn of Epic 2, the Dawn of Epic 4, and the Dawn of Epic 5. Well, right now it is the Dawn of Epic 2, and because red doesn't have a marker covering this first space, she loses 3 points. For every landscape on the board, you add 3 more resources to that landscape, and the serf who's tending it has the option to collect those resources, paying 1 to the ruler. Again, if he or she does that, he's going to only score 2 points at the beginning of the following epic. Red has 4 influence markers. She's not hurting here. But maybe she's got grand plans and feels that she really needs more influence markers. So she decides that she is going to collect these. So the 6 archery targets are going to leave this landscape tile. She's going to get 5 influence markers, and the ruler of this location, pink, is going to get 1 influence marker. So red's going to get 5, pink's going to get 1. The landscape will be empty, so red will only score 2 points at the dawn of the next epoch. So she gets 5 more markers, and pink is going to get 1 more marker. And now we're back to the next round. There are only 2 more things I think I want to show you here, because I haven't shown you monsters, and I haven't shown you this other track up here. So let me really quickly prepare for that. So for this round, let's just have red choose to do a migrate and an influence and a guild and a repeat. And I'll have pink choose move, influence, guild, and repeat. Okay, it's red's turn. Let's demonstrate how monsters work. To get a monster, you have to be able to perform the guild trade action at the Knight's Guild, and you have to have at least 3 influence markers there. Well, red does fulfill those requirements, so she plays her guild card. She performs the trade action at the Knight's Guild. She gets 3 influence markers. So right now she's got 12 influence markers. But in order to take control of a monster, you have to give 2 of those back to the supply, and 1 of them covers up the monster space for the monster that you're planning to deploy. So she is going to do it. She can either deploy the Behemoth or the Sea Serpent, because neither of them have been deployed yet. Now, if she deploys the Behemoth, it can go anywhere, because Behemoths move around the board via roads or flying machine routes. They don't actually use flying machines, they just can move that way. Sea Serpents, on the other hand, move around the board via ship and submersible routes. So if red was going to deploy the Sea Serpent, she would have to deploy it at this location where she has an influence marker or a pawn, because the only way that Sea Serpent can move is out this way via a ship or submersible route. Instead, red is going to deploy the Behemoth and bring him down to this. She's going to bring him down to this location. So 2 of her influence markers, she did have, 12? So now she's down to 9, because 2 of those influence markers went back to the supply, and now 1 of them is covering the Behemoth space in the Knight's Guild, indicating that the Behemoth here is under red's control. If for some reason the Behemoth got defeated in battle somewhere along the way, then red would get her influence marker back from this space. She wouldn't get the other 2, but she'd get this one back. Now, there are many benefits that monsters provide you. They provide you additional movement points. So if red wanted to do a move action, she would have 2 movement points available, 1 from her pawn, 1 from this monster. The monster can move, just like a pawn. The Behemoth moves around roads and flying machine routes, as I said. The monsters pin opposing pawns that are located in this, that are at the same location as they are. So pink's Alchemist is pinned at this location because red has a Behemoth there. You already saw that monsters can get involved in battle and add +1 or +1 attack value or +1 defend value. They don't have to be fed. Monsters eat people, and you can't influence locations where monsters are. You can only influence locations where you have a pawn. Just want to clarify that as well. So monsters do act like pawns in some ways, but they don't act like pawns in other ways. Now I'm going to have pink do a move action. So let's just have pink move this pawn using the ship, maybe down to this location. Maybe she wants to, or better yet, maybe to this location. Can't she move to that location? No, ships can't move this way. This is only I think this requires a sub. Oh, yeah, you can't get here by ship. So, yeah, Pink's only option is to come down here by ship. Okay, let's kind of bring that ship a little closer. Move those guys around a little bit. Okay, so she moved there, and she can't move this. He can't move this pawn because it's pinned by the monster. So all he can do here is pilfer this wood. Okay, we're back to red. Okay, so maybe red does have plans to attack here. So red is going to migrate. Because red has an influence marker here, red can bring her knight pawn. Now, I didn't have her play choose a conquer card, but maybe I should have, just to demonstrate that she could have then subsequently tried to attack Pink's alchemist there. Now we're back to Pink. So now I want to demonstrate this track. When you do a move action twice in one round by using the repeat card, so now Pink is going to play her repeat action, and she was going to repeat her move action, which has an X2 in the corner, so it's free. She doesn't have to pay a saltpeter to do it. Now all she has to do is move one of her pawns, so she'll move her pawn. Let's see, where can this guy go? It can go down here, it can go back there, or it can go over here. Maybe she wants to go over here to this island. So she's going to sail her ship over here. Oops. Oh, wait a minute. Was that by ship? Oh, that's only by submersible. Darn it. So this guy can only come down here by ship. So if she were going to come down here, she's going to come over here. Where's the ship? Oh, here's the ship. Let's kind of bring it back because of the video program I'm using. Okay, so Pink has completed 2 move actions in 1 round. So I click continue, and now Pink has the option to place one of her discs on the Epic Voyage track. Now, contrary to the military service track, where you have to have 1 disc on each space, you only need 1 disc for this track. And then it just moves along the track every time you do a repeat move action. Now remember, if Pink had remember Pink put one of her markers on this space of the military service track with plans to possibly rule a feudum, but she'd have to fill in some more spaces here to avoid losing points. But maybe her plans are to use her other disc to cover this space and understand that she's going to lose 5 points at the end of the game for not covering up this space. But she's hoping that she can advance on this track by doing enough repeat move actions to compensate for the 5 points that she'd lose. So right now, by adding a disc to the Epic Voyage track, she's guaranteed to score 5 points at the end of the game. Because if you're in the lead or tied for the lead in this section, you score 5 points. If you're behind, if you have a disc on the track and are in second place because the leader is on this space, say, and you're on this space, then you only score 3 points. Now, if I had Pink to do another repeat move action, and she would want to advance her pawn, her marker, her disc, she would advance her disc to the next space. But she will be able to draw 2 royal writs, keep 1, return the other to the bottom of the deck. If she then does another repeat action, another move action, she'll advance her disc to this to this space, and now she's going to be scoring 9 points if she's in the lead in this section or tied for the lead. And if red does get on this track and takes over the lead, then Pink would only score 7 points for being in second place in this section. If she keeps moving, and then if she moved it again, Pink, if he moved it again, he would draw 2 royal writs, keep 1 when he got to this space. If he moved it again, he'd get to this space and now possibly earn 13 or 11 points at the end of the game. And potentially, if you occupy this last space in the monastery, you could score 17 points at the end of the game. But that's a lot of repeat move action. So if you're going to make inroads on this track and have plans to score a lot of points, you've got to plan on playing a lot of move and repeat actions in order to keep advancing your disc along this track. Okay, so how does endgame scoring work once the end of work? Well, remember, once you reach Epic 5, the dawn of Epic 5, because if at least one Epic 5 marker, or if one of these stacks is empty, and then you basically revealed the Epic 5 symbol on the board, then you would score for the dawn of Epic 5 in the same way we just scored for the dawn of Epic 2. And then you would, after that, immediately move into endgame scoring. During endgame scoring, you score for your position on the Epic Voyage track. You score 1 point for every outpost, farm, and town that you rule. You score 3 points for every feudum that you rule. And then you score 3 points for every 3 identical locations that you rule, where feudums can be used as wild locations. So, for instance, if it were the end of the game, and if Pink was ruling a feudum, he could say that he is ruling a farm here and a farm here, and treat the feudum as a wild farm, so to speak, and say, okay, now I'm ruling 3 farms, and he would score an additional 3 points. So you score 3 points at the end of the game for every 3 identical locations that you're ruling, and you can treat feudum locations that you rule as being feudum locations that you rule, or you can treat them as a wild outpost that you're ruling if you want to get a score for a triplet of 3 outposts, or a triplet of 3 farms, or whatever the case may be. You get a victory point for every 3 shillings in your possession at the end of the game, and if you've got some royal writs and you can assign a king's seal to them, then you potentially can score points from your royal writs. If I haven't already said, I should point out that you can only hold up to 3 royal writ cards in your hand at once. That's the limit. So if you ever draw a 4th royal writ, you have to discard back down to 3. At the end of the game, the player who has the most victory points wins, but if there's the tie, the player who has the most sulfur left in their wine barrel wins, as the rules say, because sobriety is more honorable. Otherwise, the players share the victory. And I think that is going to pretty much do it. I have covered the bulk of the rules in great detail here. I'm sure you haven't watched all of this. This has gone on way too long. I wanted to try to keep it short and not complete, but that's kind of, there's no way to, that's a self-defeating prophecy. But at some point down the road, I will take all this information that I've just conveyed, and I'll demonstrate a three-player playthrough of the game. And then somewhere down the road from that, I'll demonstrate how you use the Queen's Army expansion to play this game solo. But for now, this video has gone on long enough. Thank you so much for watching any part of this, and bye-bye for now.